Happy Friday! I am so excited to be doing another transcript reading back from the Jonathan Majors trial. If you are new to this channel and you haven't been around since we started looking at the Jonathan Majors trial, pay attention to the live chat if you're here watching this live. The people that have, come together in this community from the Jonathan Majors trial, watching everything that he went through, from overzealous charging from the very start, the media parade that ensued, the trial, the way the trial went down, all the way to the verdict coming down and the media still not wanting to report that it was a split verdict and he was actually acquitted of any of the charges that would have suggested that the jury believed he was abusive. They did not believe that. Today we're going to be looking at the closing arguments. Since this trial wasn't live streamed, we had to rely on transcripts plus people that went down to the courtroom in person to help do some reporting themselves. Big shout out to Danielle Atherton. You can find her YouTube channel at Danny Does This and That. Also, Lauren Victoria Burke. She is frequently on the Roland Martin show, but she also has her own channel. Search her name, she'll come up. There's also someone by the name of Jimmy who was just watching these YouTube videos, realized that Danny wasn't going to be able to make it to court one day and said, "Hey, I'm in court," sent an email over. I don't know why, but I felt like someone had to be here in the absence of someone being there. So shout out to Jimmy too. Everyone that has been part of watching the Jonathan Majors trial, it's been an incredible thing to see. And if it wasn't for the people that came with an interest in this, the story would look so different than what we know it is now from looking at these transcripts. So again, if you are new, you can go back. There's a playlist on my channel. I think it's in the description already. You can look through all the transcripts from week 1, including the star witness, Grace Jabbari herself, the ex-girlfriend of Jonathan Majors. It's an incredible case to look at. If you think that he was guilty, your mind is going to be just blown. I'm sure the chat will tell you. The second thing I want to say is shout out to everyone who donated to the GoFundMe for the first week of transcripts. I was so blown away that anyone even started donating, and you guys crowdsourced over $2,000 to contribute to the 2,600. Like, that's just so incredible. In my own shoes, I was like, okay, I want these transcripts. I want to know what happened. And I just thought it was going to be something that I came out of pocket for. And it's just so amazing you guys all came together. So as a thank you, in the last, 3 or 4 live streams that with Pam and Danny, we kind of had like an informal conversation. What would be if we got more transcripts? What would we be the most interested in looking at? And the vast majority of people said, we want to see the closing arguments. So we've got the defense and the prosecution arguments here. Shout out to Casey, the court reporter. I had emailed her on Tuesday or Wednesday, and she got them to me yesterday. So we're going to jump right in. Lauren Victoria Burke is in the chat, and thank you so much for your $20 super chat, Lauren Victoria Burke. I'm going to pull up your channel and drop the link. I don't know if you just got here, but a second ago I was giving a shout out to you, letting them know that you actually were in the courtroom for some of the days, which is just so incredible, and it's so needed, especially in a district where courts are not transparent. So let me get this in the chat. So if you're in the live chat right now, guys, the link in the chat is for Lauren Victoria Burke's channel. You can dip out of here really quick, go give her a subscribe, and then come right back. If you're watching this on replay, I'll make sure I get it in the description as well. And then here we go. So on the day of closing arguments, the defense went first. So we're going to start with the defense closing arguments, and it's going to be Priya Chaudhry that was reading them. Yeah, Chillmonger saying we've already subbed. Good. As you should. Oh wait, I'm in the wrong window, am I? No. Okay, here we go. So, it starts off, Mr. Majors, why are you here? Why did they say Mr. Majors? I'm not sure why they said Mr. Majors, but it's Priya Chaudhry speaking here. Why are you here? You're probably wondering why you spent the last 2 weeks of your life to see what is obvious to anyone interested in facts and evidence. Grace Jabbari was not hurt when she got out of the car on Center and Canal. Jonathan Majors is innocent, and Grace is a liar. There is no mystery about what happened in the car. The driver told us. She did everything. He did nothing. She was hitting him. He was telling her to leave him alone. Quote, "The boy was trying to get rid of the girl. There is no mystery about what happened after they got out of the car the first time. The video shows us." So then they play the video. If you give me after we get done reading, we can look at that video again. It never gets old. If you are new to this case, if you've heard that Grace Jabbari, chases Jonathan Majors for blocks and blocks and blocks through New York City, it's not an exaggeration. We will watch that video. We all just saw it with our own eyes. He puts her back in the car because they're in the middle of moving traffic. She keeps grabbing him. He tells her to leave him alone and tries to stop her from jumping out of the car in moving traffic. He helps her out of the car. He walks her safely to the sidewalk. And then she starts grabbing him again. He shakes her hand off and runs from her. And she chases him, even in front of a moving car. There's no mystery about what happened in the car. Grace herself told Chloe, Max, and Shams, the 3 strangers she ran into on the sidewalk. 1 minute after she got out of the car, out of breath from that chase, upset, fluffing up her hair with her right hand, tying a bun with her unbroken fingers on her unbloody hair, before she had time to think of a lie. "My boyfriend is Jonathan Majors. I think he's cheating on me. I'm so embarrassed." Why are you here? There's no mystery about what happened after Grace found Jonathan on the street corner again. The video showed us. She followed him. She attacked him in the car again. She ripped his coat with her bare, unbroken fingers. He then turned around and helped her out of the car again. And she's totally fine. Why are you here? There's no mystery what happened after Jonathan finally escaped Grace that night. The strangers she went clubbing with told you everything. Told you what happened. The videos show you. She had a ball. There she is at the bar, selecting champagne. There she is holding champagne. There she is going through her purse. There she is doing shots, all with her right hand. There she is holding hands on the dance floor with strangers with her right hand, holding onto the DJ booth with her right hand, dancing with other people with her right hand, smoking illegally in a nightclub with her right hand, her left busy holding her glass of champagne. She's not hurt. Look at her leaving the club. She's still holding the handrail. She has no bruising. She has no swelling. She's still using her hand to do everything she's been able to do all night. She's not bloody. She's not in shock. There she is at the end of the night, hanging out at the hostess stand, using her right hand. There she is, hugging a woman she met a few hours earlier tightly, drunkenly. There she is, smiling as she leaves. There she is holding that woman's hand with her right hand, smiling, swaying, not even on the dance floor anymore. She was revenge partying and charging champagne to the man she's angry with, and treating these strangers to fancy champagne she bought on Jonathan's credit card. So the people's 3 best witnesses told you that Jonathan Majors is innocent. The driver, Chloe, and Max. They might as well have been defense witnesses. They told you Grace did everything. She was unhurt. He thanked them for taking care of Grace. She wanted to go clubbing. She was fine. Not a mark on her body, not a speck of blood. So why has the DA's office wasted the past 2 weeks of your life and the past 9 months of objection, judge, an innocent man's life that's overruled, trying to figure out what happened for 30 seconds in the back of a car, when the real question is what happened in the apartment between when Grace got off the elevator looking like this? So then they're playing the video of Grace arriving home and looking for her keys in her bag to get back up to the penthouse. The real question is what happened between that moment at 11, at 3:30 a.m., and 11:22 when she was found looking like this, and when she sounded like this. So then they play a video when they find her laying in the closet with no pants on. What happened in the 8 hours from when she got home looking fine, sauntering through the lobby, and when she was found by the man who called 911? That's Jonathan Majors. If you're new to this, it was Jonathan Majors who made the 911 call. We don't know. And why don't we know? Because the cops who found her unconscious, lying on the closet floor, who heard her say she was confused, who heard her say she did not know why she was in the closet, who heard her say she did not know what happened to her finger or her ear, they took a look at Mr. Majors and they made up their minds. They decided, and we have the motion, we see the motion in the video. They decided who was the victim and who was the criminal. And then they asked Grace if Mr. Majors had done this to her. Those cops ignored her when she said, "I don't know what happened," but believed her when she finally answered yes to their question of, "Did he do this to you?" And they did not bother to investigate. They didn't ask why she was sick in the bed. They did not even check the bed. They didn't bother to talk to anyone that night. They didn't bother to talk to anyone she saw that night. They didn't even bother to compare Grace's story that she was telling them with what was directly before their eyes. that there was not a single mark on her face or other fingers or anywhere that backed up her lies that Jonathan Majors put his hands on her in that car. They bought her white lies. Objection, overruled. They bought her big lies. Who else bought her lies? These prosecutors bought Grace's white lies, her big lies, and all her pretty little lies. Like the cops, and before any real investigation, they immediately decided who they would call a victim and who they saw as a criminal. They chose to contort reality and accept Grace's lies, even after she told them that she didn't know how she got those injuries, and even after she changed her own story a month later. They spoke to the driver. They spoke to Chloe and Max. They watched these videos. They saw her dancing, laughing, unharmed. She told them she was freaked out by a blip in her memory that night, and yet they charged this innocent man despite the evidence. And they asked you to all believe her white lies, all her big lies, and all her pretty little lies. They want you to see the world through their lens, that Grace is a victim and Jonathan is the criminal, and the people need you to believe Grace's lies in order to convict this innocent man. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Perez also lied to you in his opening statement. Objection, sustained. You'll disregard that last comment. Mr. Perez promised you in his opening statement. Objection, that's overruled. He promised you that the driver would sit up there, and he would say that Jonathan threw Grace like a football into the car with a force of 10 out of 10. That's not what the driver said, not even close. Mr. Perez promised you that Chloe would say that Grace was icing her finger, but he conveniently left out that Chloe doesn't even know which finger, that Chloe herself was incredibly drunk, and that Chloe was also busy talking to 75 to 100 of her closest friends. That's a big party. Mr. Perez and Miss Galaway want you to buy Grace's lies, and in summation, I expect that they will play the video of Jonathan and Grace exiting the car over and over again. That part of the video where Jonathan pushes Grace back into the vehicle, and they're going to argue that that is proof of their case. That's all they need, just that video. No context, nothing. Just that video. But that's not the law. Context is everything. You heard from the driver who told you that Grace had attacked Jonathan all night, that Jonathan asked him to stop the car, that Jonathan was trying to get rid of her, that Jonathan was trying to get her to leave him alone. You even heard from Grace that Jonathan was pushing her back into the car, trying to make her stay in the car. And you saw for yourself, Jonathan put Grace back in the car in the middle of her attacking him in moving traffic. But she kept attacking him, and then she chased him up the street. They will argue, I expect, that video is conclusive proof of their case. But it's the exact opposite. It shows you what was really happening in the car before they got out, that Jonathan was trying to escape Grace, and Grace kept attacking him. This entire case is built on Grace's lies, and boy, does Grace lie. It's hard to keep your story straight when you're making it up as you go. You saw it yourself. She was there, I was here, you were there. And she was in her own fantasy world, lying away, even denying what we could all see with our own eyes on a video. Nope, I didn't hit my head on the DJ booth. Nope, I didn't hold hands with anyone on the dance floor. Nope, I wasn't smoking at the club. How could I? That would be illegal. Nope, I never bumped into the wall. Remember when she told you that they were in the car for 2 minutes during part 2, when it was actually closer to 5 seconds? Let's watch. So then they watched that second part of the car video. Part of the video that shows when they were in the car for the second time of the night. There's Jonathan and Grace getting in the car. The driver has the door open. He's looking in the car. Driver shuts the door. Jonathan pops out the other side. There's Grace ripping his coat off with all of her strength to try to keep him in the car. And watch, as soon as he gets out, Jonathan helped her out of the car. Do you remember when I showed her that? What she said was, "It felt like 2 minutes to me." She told you that Mr. Majors smashed the back of her head into the car in the video we watched here. The same video that the people played over and over, and even zoomed in and played in slow motion for you. She told you that he smashed the back of her head as he picked her up, threw her against the car. She told you her head flew and it hurt. Remember, she said, it hurt. Right where her ponytail was, it hurt. And then when I showed, and when we read those transcripts, they do describe, they write down the motion of her, the top of her head where her hair was pinned up. And then when I showed her that video, proving that she's actually facing the car when Jonathan picked her up and placed her back in the seat, when I proved to her she could not possibly have hit the back of her head, when I showed her that what we were looking at was actually her hair, so she was facing the car, you yourself saw what she said. Let's watch the video one more time. So they play the video again. This is from the People's Exhibit. There's Jonathan picking her up from the back. They're both facing the car. That is the back of Grace's head. It never even touches the car. No part of her head touched the car. And she was facing the car. The back of her head could not possibly have touched the car. And what did she say to you right there in her fantasy world, in that seat? She said to me, It looks like the back of me. If it's not, I don't know what to say. That's what I believe. I'm basing it on what it felt like. You don't get to destroy people's lives, objection, that's overruled, with your fantasies. You don't get to destroy people's lives with your fantasies. Grace is obviously an emotional person. Many people are. But she cannot distinguish between facts and her feelings. Criminal trials, however, are about facts, about evidence, about proof, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt for the allegations that the government chose to make against this innocent man. They have to prove how Grace got those injuries. And how did Grace get her injuries? Let's ask her. At 8 a.m. on March 25th, she told her friend Holly, "I don't know." At 11:20 a.m. on March 25th, to the cops in the closet, she said, "I don't know." At 11:25 a.m. on March 25th, to the medics, she said, "I don't know." When she was at Bellevue Hospital for 6 hours, she told the doctor after doctor, "I don't know how I got these injuries." On March 27th, to these very prosecutors, Grace said, "I don't know how I got these injuries." On April 25th, she told these prosecutors she had a blip in her memory. And then, last week to you, while she sat there, she said the following. I asked, "And isn't it true that night you were confused when you spoke to Chloe about how your ear got hurt?" And she said, "I still am." You know. They're going to try to explain this away, that she's afraid to report. But that jig is up. We're here. She's reported. She's sitting right here. And she told you that she still doesn't know how her ear got hurt. If she does not know, why are we here? In fact, every time I ask Grace to show you how she claims that Jonathan caused these injuries, her story changed. I mean, it's hard to keep your story straight when you're making it up as you go. Fine, I'll give her that. But not one version of her story matches up with the photos, the videos, the witness testimony, the medical evidence, or common sense. If you believe Grace, she's in excruciating pain, but she doesn't scream. She's grabbed by a huge, very strong man, but has no hand marks, scratches, bruises anywhere on her body, and no injury to the shoulder he twisted with extreme force before she gets home that night. If you believe Grace, her entire hand is twisted for a long time, but there's no bruising or injury anywhere to her finger, except for an oblique fracture in the joint in her right middle finger. If you believe Grace, she had an adrenaline rush that lasts longer than humanly possible, by hours. If you believe Grace, her finger is broken by twisting, even though the fracture that she actually has is caused by falling or hitting something. If you believe Grace, she feels immediate pain in her arm and her head and her finger, but she does not take any pain medication. If you believe Grace, that she's badly beaten and hurt by her very large boyfriend she claims has been controlling and manipulating her, and, instead of running away, she immediately chases him for blocks, and then attacks him as soon as they're back in the car again. If you believe Grace, then her head is throbbing from a sharp blow to the back of her head, but instead of going home, she goes to a loud, crowded dance club with strangers and strobe lights and laughs the whole time. If you believe Grace, then she can't remember how much or what she drank at the club, but she was not too drunk, and her finger had began swelling, even though this photo shows that she's so drunk and wasted that her tongue is hanging out and her finger's not swollen at all. If you believe Grace, her finger's broken and painful, and instead of guarding and protecting it, like any other person would, she laughs while using it, in a way that would be medically excruciating. If you believe Grace, she was able to ice a broken finger, and then show no sense of pain whatsoever when squeezing things with that very finger, including smoking a cigarette while dancing away. If you believe Grace, then even though this nightclub has video cameras everywhere, and there's hours of footage of her in the nightclub, she conveniently claims to have iced her finger in the one spot that's out of view of the cameras. If you believe Grace, even though her finger hurt and she wanted to ice it, while she's standing at the bar several times on video, in view of the camera, she never once gets ice from the bartender. If you believe Grace, she has an ear laceration at 12:41 a.m. That would profusely bleed everywhere, on everything and everyone she touched, but there's no blood until she wakes up at 8 a.m. If you believe Grace, she repeatedly touched her ear laceration with her broken finger for hours at a dance club and shows no sign of pain and has no blood on her finger. If you believe Grace, she has a high pain tolerance, but when she's found in the closet, she's visibly upset and crying from the pain to her ear and her finger, and she can't stop talking about it. If you believe Grace, then she went to sleep on the floor between the bathroom and the closet, even though the police found her in the closet, and we all saw her lying on the floor of the closet. If you believe Grace, she was not suicidal, even though she ran in front of a moving car that she saw, and she sent Jonathan texts that she admits were dramatic about leaving no note. If you believe Grace, then Jonathan is able to sit in a bucket seat in that huge Escalade and reach over with both arms, like Inspector Gadget, and press Grace against the opposite door. If you believe Grace, then Jonathan hit her on the back of her ear without leaving any injury to her earlobe, her skull, or any bumps or bruising when she was examined at Bellevue. If you believe Grace, then Jonathan used his incredible strength to pry all her fingers off his own phone without leaving a mark or injury to any other finger. If you believe Grace, then she returns to the apartment in excruciating all-body pain, even though we saw what she looked like when she walked back into the apartment. If you believe Grace, when she returned, she was in so much pain that she could not sleep. She was in so much pain that she couldn't find a comfortable position. But instead of taking pain medication that's in the same medicine cabinet, she took some sleeping pills. If you believe Grace, then despite Jonathan telling her how dangerous it is for a black man to call police in America, objection, no, there was testimony that's overruled. If you believe Grace, then despite Jonathan telling her how dangerous it is for a black man to call the police in America, objection, that's overruled. Excuse me, I'm going to start that sentence one more time. I keep getting interrupted. If you believe Grace, then despite Jonathan Majors telling her how dangerous it is for a black man to call the police in America, despite that, he beat her badly in a car that was both in his own name, and then he called 911 on himself. And if you believe Grace, then Jonathan caused these injuries, and then he told the 911 operator about her injuries, and then he told the cops, who showed up to his apartment, that they got into an argument the night before. Perez objects again. Overruled. I could go on, and you probably have your own list of all the greatest lies that Grace Jabari's ever told you. But I want to end this nightmare for Jonathan now, immediately, as quickly as possible. It's just fake. Nothing she says makes sense. Nothing she says is medically possible. Everything she said is belied by the videos. Everything she said is belied by the very witnesses who were there that night. Everything she did and said flies in the face of every moment, of everything each of you have ever seen in your own lives. And that's why there's no evidence, videos, witnesses, medical, otherwise, that anything she says happened in the car actually happened. Okay, let's ask another question. Where's the blood? With that cut to her ear, there would be blood. These prosecutors have not only bought Grace's white lies and her big lies, but they're selling these very lies to you in order to convict this innocent man, and they will contort themselves to explain away everything you saw in those videos and everything you heard from their own witnesses. But how are they going to explain the utter absence of blood from a head wound that would have immediately turned Grace's shirt into a crime scene? There's no blood in the car. There's no blood in Grace's hair. There's no blood on Chloe's blonde hair or on her bare shoulders. There's no blood on Grace's shirt. There's no blood on Sham's shirt after Grace leaned her right ear against it. There's no blood on Grace's finger as she keeps touching her ear. There's no blood anywhere. If what Grace told you was true, there would be blood, and she would be the one wearing red in those videos. If Jonathan had done what Grace told you he did, there would be no doubt in this case, and there would be blood. Did their social worker expert tell you that people in abusive relationships don't bleed when cut? This case is not about reporting abuse. It's about not bleeding when cut. Now, is that why these same prosecutors didn't show their own emergency medicine doctor, Dr. Shang, any of the evidence? Objection, Judge, sustained. They did not show Dr. Shang on the stand any of the photos in this case. Objection, that's overruled. If you're in the chat, what photos do you think they're talking about? Chaudhry. They did not show Dr. Shang any of the videos in this case. They did not ask Dr. Shang about any of Grace's testimony of how she says she got these injuries. And why not? The answer is obvious. He would have said exactly what Dr. Wiener said. That's not how that finger broke. That's not how she got that cut. And none of the things she claims actually happened. Grace bends reality, and these prosecutors contort themselves to keep up. Objection, Judge. That's sustained. Disregard that last comment. They also hid things from you. Objection. That's sustained. We ask it be stricken from the record. It's stricken. Thank you. They showed you a compilation video that deliberately did not include. Objection, Judge. Overruled. They showed you a compilation video that they made, that they directed their analyst what to put in, what to slow down, what to repeat. And what did they leave out of it? They made a compilation video that left out Grace sneaking back to the table at dinner to suck down one more margarita and stash the glass before Jonathan could see it. Why didn't they want you to see Grace being sneaky with booze? Their video left out the entire audio of the corner of 129 Lafayette. Objection. That's sustained. That last comment will be stricken from the record. This is where Grace meets those strangers who then become her party buddies. Let's remember what she said to them a minute after running out of that car. So they play the video of Chloe Max Shams being on the sidewalk. Grace goes up to them. These are the first words out of Grace's mouth. She makes zero mention of any injuries. So it's those words where she says, "Hi, I'm Jonathan Majors' girlfriend. I think he's cheating on me. I'm so embarrassed." And Max is like, "No way." She makes zero mention of any injuries. She's obviously not hurt. She makes zero mention of being hit or hurt or feeling pain. The People's compilation video that they showed you, that they asked their analyst to put together, left out all of the footage, the hours of footage from inside the dance club. Why didn't they want you to see her dancing, drinking, laughing, and smoking? If they truly believed that anyone with these injuries, who had just been badly beaten, would act like this, why not just show you? Their compilation video did not include the audio of Grace when she first talked to the medics, when she told them, objection, sustained, and that comment will be stricken. These are prosecutors. Prosecutors have a lot of power. Objection, judge, overruled. They decide who should be a criminal and who they call a victim. Objection, sustained, that will be stricken from the record. They decide who to charge with a crime. Grace is not on trial, but maybe she should be. Sustained. There was no even, Perez didn't even have to lodge the objection, so judge just said sustained. The driver told you she's the one who attacked Jonathan. She's the one who chased Jonathan out of the car for blocks. She's the one we all saw ripping the buttons off his coat as he tries to escape. She got arrested. Objection, sustained. The last comment will be stricken. After all that, these prosecutors charge Jonathan Majors. Ask yourself, why? Why are we here? It's obvious what happened. Grace gets out of the car. She's fine. She goes clubbing. She's fine. She gets home. She's fine, but drunk. At no point does she guard her right hand. At no point does she favor her left hand. And then she entered the apartment. She takes off her shoes, her coat, her bag. She unbuttons her blouse, takes it off, unzips, and takes off her jeans. Objection, judge. No, that's overruled. She removes all her undergarments, washes the makeup off her face, lights a candle, leaves a cork and a half-drunk drink on the credenza. Objection, sustained. She goes, strike it from the record, please. It is stricken. She goes up 2 flights of wooden stairs, sends a bunch of angry text messages to Jonathan about infidelity, calls him 32 times, opens a pill bottle, takes 2 blue pills, gets sick in the sheets, has a blip in her memory, and the next time anyone sees her, she has a cut behind her ear that would bleed profusely and a finger fracture that both ER doctors told you comes from falling or hitting something. And after the cops find Grace and take her to the hospital, she acts and feels like someone with a terrible, terrible hangover. This whole trial has been about what happened in that car. Even though the people want this trial to be about arguments from months and years ago, they've never wanted this trial to be about what happened in the car, because what happened in the car is obvious. The real mystery is what happened after Grace got home. We know that when Jonathan did not answer her 32 calls, Grace sent him dramatic text messages about no notes. We know that she told the medics and her friend, Ben, that she was sick in the sheets, and it was disgusting. In fact, Ben describes it as Grace having an accident in the sheets. We know that she told Holly that there was blood on the pillow, which, obviously, means her ear bled like any ear would bleed with that cut. No one ever saw what she was wearing when she started bleeding. No one ever saw what she used to clean the blood from the pillow, from her hair, or her clothes. And we know from Grace's own testimony that she did clean the blood from her ear and the blood from under her fingernails when she first took those photos at 8 a.m., before the cops found her 3 hours later. We know that she had the blinds open when she took those first photos at 8 a.m., and then she closed them before the cops arrived at 11:18. We know from Holly that from 8 a.m., when Grace started texting and speaking with Holly, Holly told you they spoke every 20 minutes, which means that Grace was awake and able to communicate at 8 a.m., 8:20, 8:40, 9, 9:20, 9:40, 10, 10:20, 10:40. And we know that Jonathan arrives back at the apartment at about 10:40. We know that he tries calling her several times and she does not answer. We know that by 11:43, Jonathan calls Elon, his agent, sounding terrified. And Elon, am I saying his name right, guys? Hears loud banging. We know that Grace is behind the locked bedroom door while Jonathan is banging. We know that at 11:07, Grace is behind the locked bedroom door, not with the blinds shut, awake and texting Holly. We know that at 11:07, the handyman is getting off the elevator. Sorry, at 11:08, the handyman gets off the elevator at the penthouse floor. This means that at the exact time that Grace is awake and texting her friend Holly, telling Holly that she's about to pack, the handyman is on his way to unlock the door. And we know that Jonathan bangs on that door again and again, afraid, on the phone with Elon, sounding terrified. And we know that 6 minutes after Grace is awake and texting Holly, at 11:13, Jonathan finds her unconscious on the floor of the closet, half naked from the waist down, and calls 911, clearly terrified and concerned that she tried to unalive herself. We know that even though Grace claims to have fainted after she sent the text at 11:07, 6 minutes before she's found, her phone is not near her hand, which is where it would be if she actually fainted. In fact, her phone is nowhere to be seen in the closet. We know that when police arrive at 11:20, 13 minutes after Grace was awake and texting with Holly, Grace acts like she's still unconscious and confused and can't even respond to her own name. We know that Grace did not tell the police that she had just been texting before they arrived, and instead, she lied. And she said the last thing she remembered was being sick in the bed. We know that Grace left the closet with her phone in her hand, which means that it was in the closet with her the whole time, and she had just put it somewhere that nobody would see. Grace was awake when Jonathan got back to the apartment. Grace was awake when Jonathan was banging on the door with a terrified voice out of concern for her. Grace was awake and texting when the handyman was coming out of the elevator to open the door. Grace may have been texting the moment Jonathan was banging on the door. And then, 6 minutes later, Jonathan found Grace on the floor, with injuries, appearing unconscious. He was scared and concerned for her, for the woman who attacked him hours earlier, who begged him to come home, and then sent him unaliving text messages when he didn't. He saw her and believed she tried to unalive herself, and he called 911 out of concern for her. And his fear of what happens when a black man calls 911, objection judge, overruled, and his fear of what happens when a black man in America calls 911 came true. And now we're here. Why are we here? We're here because no one bothered to ask Grace how she could possibly have been texting at 11:07 and then unconscious on the closet floor for the next 13 minutes. Because no one asked to see her phone, or to see the blood, or to see the sheets, or to see anything really to this day. We are here because the police made their minds up on site. We are here because the prosecutors decided who to charge with the crime and who they believe is the victim of the crime. So why is she lying now? Is it revenge? Is it embarrassment? We know from the Bellevue records that what upsets Grace the most is triggering events leading to humiliation, shame, and or despair, the loss of a relationship, financial or health status, real or anticipated. Maybe she hopes to make money. Objection, facts not in evidence. Sustained, last comment will be stricken. This is the same woman who started surreptitiously tape recording her movie star boyfriend a year ago. We don't have to prove why she's lying. In fact, we don't have to prove anything. They may suggest to you that this is a case about who was suicidal, who was controlling, whether Grace was actually trying to unalive herself, but it's not. And we don't have to prove any of that ever, ever, ever. They are the only ones in this courtroom who have to prove anything. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt only one thing, that Jonathan broke her finger and cut her ear in the car. Videos prove that that's not true. Their own witnesses prove that that is not true. The medical evidence proves that that is not true. You can't believe anything Grace says about what happened in that car, let alone all of it. Why are you here? You are here to end this nightmare for Jonathan Majors. Objection, Judge. Go ahead, it's overruled. You are here to see what is obvious, what the evidence shows, what the officers who showed up and these prosecutors refused to see, but what Detective Mejia saw. The only part of Grace Jabari that broke in that car was her heart. That is what the evidence proves. Exactly that, and only that. Jonathan Majors is innocent. So, that's defense's closing argument. I just reading that, obviously, I didn't look at it before this. I thought it was a great close. Interesting quote right here, that the only part of Grace Jabari that broke in that car was her heart, and we know that that statement echoes what is in that ABC interview. And I also want to go right back up to this paragraph right towards the end. From the Bellevue records. So why is she lying now? Is it revenge? Is it embarrassment? We know from the Bellevue records that what upsets Grace the most is triggering events leading to humiliation, shame, and or despair, the loss of a relationship, financial or health status, real or anticipated. So this is some stuff that we didn't get too much context of, because I'm assuming this testimony came from, the questioning of Dr. Xiang, or maybe the expert witness, Tammy Weiner, was able to look at the Bellevue reports as well. But something from the one of the witnesses that came in gave some testimony about some evaluation that she underwent at Bellevue. And we're getting here that Grace is triggered by something that can lead to her own humiliation, shame, or despair, the idea of a loss of a relationship, of financial or health status, whether it's actually really happening or she's just anticipating it as a thought. So that stood out to me while I was reading. A few other things too, but that's something kind of new here. I'm going to pause between the reading of both and see what you guys are seeing. Oh, I'm so glad I'm scrolling so far. I love the live chats because you guys always notice so much. And I skipped saying hello to everyone. So I see Barbara's here, Juanita's here, Pam is here. Hope work is going quickly, Pam. Hey, Ghost. Hey, Frankenscience. We've got Kai Lawrence. Batso's in the house. Pam was dancing, I bet, to the intro, the little intro. We've got Let Love Reign in the house. And I see you're a member, Let Love Reign. I added new stickers for members, so choose your character if you're a member. And then, hey, the universe. Bella's here. Anytime, Lauren Victoria Burke. Daisy, I lose my voice so easily. I don't even know why. It's been like that my whole life. But thank you for the kind words, and good to see you. And then, yeah, so going back to earlier, especially those pictures that didn't come in, and I appreciate that Priya, even despite all of those objections, and while I'm talking about this, what do you guys think about the objections? Objections are something you don't always see in closing arguments. I think it's something that a lot of attorneys and prosecutors typically want to reserve. They don't really want to object during opening or closing arguments, but sometimes it's necessary and sometimes it's a strategy. And here we have several. We have quite a few objections lodged by ADA Perez during Priya Chaudhry's closing arguments. Thought they were interesting. And many of them were centered around the question or the statement that Grace Jabari was arrested, and then the mention of these photographs that weren't shown to the doctor who was coming to testify in front of the jury. So those are those pictures, and I can pull them up. So if you are new, let me see the fastest way to pull those up. Guys, if you ever need to get those injury pictures quickly, what I do is I search my username on X, so at Ms. Marco Polo, and the word hotel. And it'll bring up a tweet with the 3 injuries there. These here. So he's got the scratch on his arm, which, I mean, that looks like a fingernail scratch to anyone that's ever been scratched by a nail before. Blood on the pillow the next morning, so 9 in the morning when he woke up. And then, there is a video that would be really good to watch if you're new to this and you don't know why these weren't able to come in. Look, it was a recent video. So if you go to the Jonathan Majors playlist, there's a video with the testimony of Ryan Strick. He is the DA's digital evidence analyst. It was a short one, so it was a quick run through. But most importantly, he says, yep, everything's kosher, everything can come in, everything's great. Oh, except those 3 pictures. Those are the only things that there's an issue with, because the time zones. Because they're in Pacific Standard Time. And we know this happened in New York, so I don't know, they're a problem. So the judge was like, all right, we'll have to deal with that later. You'll have to find a way to lay foundation for them during the course of the trial. Well, when they pull this up for Grace Jabari ends up saying like, well, that's his face, but I don't know if that's the shirt he was wearing that night. So the judge says that the foundation's not laid and it can't come in. So jury never gets to see the injuries that Jonathan Majors sustained from that car chase interaction between him and the ex-girlfriend that's accusing him. Yeah. And yeah, it is too bad that they didn't check her fingernails at the time of. Like, they didn't really seem to check all that much. And then Hazel, I tried to read this before I pulled it up to see if I remembered. I feel like I know something familiar going on, like with the NBA, that's like in rumor stage, but I'm not aware of this story. So first, or if you're from the United States, do you mean the NFL football, or do you mean football like soccer, like the rest of the world? Um, so he got convicted, and they only sentenced him to 6 years. So this is already post conviction. They only gave him 6 years for a conviction that led to a death. That's interesting. I think I can probably Google it with the context, but if you want to drop the name so I can remember to look into that. Yeah, sometimes, with this situation I have problems that this even went to trial, right? But then you hear these other cases sometimes where someone's convicted, someone's guilty, and then the sentencing doesn't seem to match. And then Daisy says, yeah, she's cleaning under her fingernails and then lied about cleaning her fingernails. So unfortunately, they wouldn't have found any skin. But there is photo proof of residue under her nails. And remember, guys, when Grace Jabari was testifying, she was like, yeah, I was like hitting at him like this with my hand. And Priya made her describe the motion. She wanted the motion on the record because Grace Jabari was also saying, I was hitting him like this, but I didn't scratch him. I was only hitting him. Why do you think someone would volunteer randomly? She wasn't asked a question. Did you scratch him? She was asked to describe what she was doing. And she volunteered the detail first. She was the first to mention, but I didn't scratch him. Why? Why do you think that? Let's see. Hey, Shade, good to see you. Okay, and then so Godowski, so you're asking if this transcript is something recent, and maybe someone answered you already, but just to state it out loud. So these transcripts are from the Manhattan District Court. They're very expensive per page. So when I first went to ask for transcripts, I asked for Grace Jabari's transcripts, got quoted on it, and then what ended up being delivered was all the transcripts for the first week. So I thought I was just ordering Grace Jabari's because that's who I was most interested in seeing. We ended up having more in that chunk of transcripts because I misunderstood the quote. Whatever, it's fine. This because everyone contributed to the GoFundMe. You guys raised over $2,000 to help offset the total of $2,600 to get the first week of transcripts. I was like, that's amazing. We got to do something else. And closing arguments seemed to be the most interesting thing to take a look at, especially since we got pretty decent coverage of what the driver testified to and what Chloe testified to. So I was like, cool, I'm just going to write to the court transcriber, the court reporter, see how much it would be for closing arguments. And now we've got them and we're looking at them. So it's not like they came out. I just went and requested them, and she delivered them really quickly. So we're here on a Friday night looking at them. And then, yeah, we can't forget that, according to Grace Jabari, she wasn't chasing him. She was walking with him. And maybe this would be a good time. Should we look at the chase video? That's like 30 minutes. Maybe we should do that after we do the prosecution's argument, because they're going to bring up that video again. You wish that one juror wasn't deselected. Do you mean the one that worked for the Innocence Project? Though there was a woman that said she worked for the Innocence Project. Is that who you mean, Chill? And It's Eliza says, evidence does not matter to the DA. In fact, they disregarded evidence and fabricated a story to convict just for clout. And remember, guys, again, if you're new to this or you missed a little detail, somewhere along the way we learned that Jonathan Majors wasn't even offered a plea deal. So, which it's not required that the district attorney offer someone a plea deal, but when they typically offer someone a plea deal and they choose not to offer someone a plea deal in an unusual way, I have questions. And then Alejandro Camilo, so hey, how are you? And then, well, I'm glad Priya Chaudhry is doing what she can to get the judge to overturn the guilty verdict. I thought that was a solid motion to set aside the verdict. I don't think Judge Gaffey's going to move to undo something based on his own mistakes in the courtroom or what someone's alleging was a mistake. But I think that's a great preview of what we could see on an appeal. And I think an appeal, I think there's a lot that they could go on there. So Daisy says, even with Priya saying the DA using the video of Jonathan Majors when he pushed her back to stay in the car, played repeatedly out of context to us as proof where the case is a lie and the jury disregarded it. What the heck? And yet we know from jury questions that the jurors during deliberation wanted to see that video, like up close and personal, replayed in slow-mo. I shouldn't take a drink when I'm about to read this comment. So Ramar Robinson says, Priya broke it down pretty good in my opinion. Almost convinced that the jury is dumb for them to take 3 days to reach a verdict. And then, hey, Sheep Animations, good to see you. Yeah, how they even charge this man is beyond me. And I'm glad that Priya Chaudhry focused on that in part of her closing arguments. You know, this is one of those things where if this was televised and, you know, like, think about everyone watching the Fani Willis stuff and the Rush trial. Like, the way how many people you see watching those trials when you're watching it live, and how many people are watching it on channels like Law and Crime, or when MSNBC is streaming a trial live. Just think if, like, I don't know, even this tweet that I have open here, it says it has 536,000 views. But that's just one snippet of it, right? It's not the whole picture. But if this was televised and 500,000 people watched it across any of the channels, they don't even need commentary. What do you think the atmosphere would be like out here? Because I think we'd have a totally different landscape. I don't even think the New York Times would have posted their most recent article. I don't think exes would be comfortable coming out and saying, well, you know, he was abusive to me and whatever, and then there was infidelity, so I left. Like, I think we would have a much different landscape if this case was televised. Let alone, should it even have been a trial in the first place? Why were the charges brought in the first place? 8 or 9 of them. Yeah, and again, same vein. So, Mr. Love, I love the 90s. I love the 90s too. Says Majors being found guilty is even more egregious. Yeah, so Chillmonger, I guess they did believe Grace about icing herself out of camera view. Bruh. Yeah, because they did ask that question too. I honestly think that they just said, hey, there's injuries on her, like her finger's clearly purple, and we're just gonna pick something. You know? And they were not read the justification charge for self-defense, which they're required to read to the jury. I guess this is a good time, guys. I also ordered the jury instructions, so we can go and read those in another stream another day. But surprise. But yeah, we're gonna see. I didn't read the jury instructions, but I did go Control F, command search, to find in page the word justification. And I actually just put the word just. It's not mentioned at all in the 25-page jury instruction transcripts. So I didn't read them, but I did check, and that word is not in there. And then yeah, it was a ridiculous trial. GA. So that was the thing. I was like, man, if I get these transcripts, we're gonna read them, we're gonna get like angry all over again. But I was like, I just want to know. I want to know. And I want to know why people are saying there's people that are still criticizing Priya Chaudhry, which is fine, right? But one of the biggest criticisms about Priya Chaudhry is that, you know, she didn't go argue the self-defense thing. She didn't tell the jury, you need to find this as self-defense. I have a separate video that breaks down why it would have been stupid for her to do that, based on New York statute and case law. Priya made the right strategy call for multiple reasons, but it's in line with New York statute and case law. It's in my Jonathan Majors playlist if you want to go look at it. But GA, thinking about these closing arguments, I had the same thought as you. I was like, man, I'm going to get angry again reading them. But glad you guys are here with me for it. Pam! Pam just says, Grace is a mutant. Hopefully, like, you gotta be more specific, though, because, like, you know, if we're talking, like, TMNT, like, that's a little bit of, like, a positive connotation, right? I don't think you're going that angle. And Daisy says, Priya laid it all out in this closing. How the jury just ignored this is crazy. Personally, I was loving the timestamps laid out again. I mean, we've piecemealed that together, but hearing it, like, brought up in closing arguments, it's like, do the math, jury. How do you not see this picture? And also, actually, let's go back over here. Because another thing, so I thought this little thing about the Bellevue stuff was interesting. The fact that she said the only thing that Jonathan Majors broke that night was her heart. I thought that was interesting because we know that that's echoed again in the ABC interview. But this other objection, the credenza. Because when we saw Officer Lucero's body cam, which the news got their hands on the same 19 exhibits that I requested in the response to my FOIL request, which they took their maximum time to get them to me, even though the media got it right away. They told me that they had already released this through their press team, the same set of exhibits, which means the same media outlets that showed us some of the stuff when it was dropped on that Wednesday while trial was still going on. They had Officer Lucero's body cam video, but we didn't really see anyone spread that around. So we all got together, we did a live stream. That's another good one to watch. We go through that, we're looking at it with a fine-tooth magnifying glass, and you see a lot more with Officer Lucero's body cam footage. You see what all the furniture looks like. You see he looks around a lot more with his camera, and it's a longer video. The only thing they cut out of it, I think, is the moment that they officially placed Jonathan Majors under arrest. They even show Grace Jabari putting a scarf over her head, like people are gonna think she's a celebrity walking away with medics and officers, and then she just like drops it back down as if she decides she actually does want to be seen. Interesting body cam video. It wasn't blasted around as much as Officer Sween's, but it's way more interesting. Chaudhry slips in this bit here. She removes all her undergarments, washes the makeup off her face, lights a candle, leaves a cork and a half-drunk drink on the credenza. And when we were watching the Officer Lucero body cam video, we were like, is she just dirty, leaving glasses everywhere? Like, have those been sitting there for a day? Or did she come back and open another bottle and start drinking it after she already lost track of how much she'd been drinking throughout the night? And here we have Priya in closing arguments. And again, closing arguments are not evidence, guys. But Priya's just saying, she's saying it out loud. She lights the candle, and we know that Officer Lucero has to go and blow the candle out on the body cam because he knows he's about to place Jonathan Majors under arrest and no one's going to be in the house. There's a cork and a drink. So she went and drank more. And they sustained it, though. Fair enough. But yeah, how the jury ignored all that. It's funny that the judge keeps overruling, but rarely ruled properly for the defense. Yeah, I was happy. I think he wanted to hear this. I honestly think there's some moments in the trial where some of the decisions I think the judge made were purely because he wanted to hear things as they were happening. But yeah, during the course of testimony, he was a lot quicker to sustain a lot more of the prosecution's objections against the defense. And here in closing arguments, we have a few that are sustained. The arrest one, this one here with well, she lights the candle. But yeah, it seems like he wanted to hear and let it flow. And he also sustained all the objections in this where she's like, the prosecutor lied to you. So she had to correct the words to say the prosecutor told you. They saw her put on her shoes using two hands, collecting things with the bruised finger in the elevator, fix her scarf, jam her hand in the pocket. Y'all watching this, but you, a big black man. That is what they saw. And again, that's also in the Lucero body cam video. She's giggling, sitting on the ground. You know when you gotta like pull the back of your sneaker or your shoe heel, and you gotta really get your finger up in there to get it around your foot. And especially if she's a mutant, she might have weird dance feet, you know, might be a little bit harder to get up there. Imagine doing that with an injured finger. And she's doing that and like giggling in the body cam view. It's just like, so doesn't look like pain is on her mind. Let's see. So Shahid says, hey Shahid, all history will remember is that he was guilty. Yep. That's how slander works. It's going to get thrown out or appealed. And that's the thing, right? So by the time something gets appealed, even if the appeal pans out or if it has to go to an appeal, right? If Judge, I'm about to say McAfee, I'm confusing trials. Judge Gaffey. If Judge Gaffey by some miracle decides, all right, Priya, I agree with your criticism of myself, that I messed up by not reading the jury the justification charge while reading them jury instructions. I'm going to set aside the verdict. If by some miracle that happens, cool. It's still not going to be as reported as the verdict. If we have to go to an appeal to get the right remedy here, post-conviction, and the appeal ends up being successful at some point down the line, we're not going to get even less of a media update, of news coverage, of that successful appeal. Fraction of what was covered with the verdict. A fraction of what news blew up around the release of the text messages that were supposed to look so bad for Jonathan Majors. And yeah, everyone's agreeing with that sentiment that Shahid is exactly right. And then, yeah, Judge Gaffey was a very interesting guy. So Barbara Screaming Cat, thank you for the transcripts. Yes, I know I'm yelling. It's that important. It really is. It really is. Like, televise these trials, or at least honestly, make the transcripts not... Because these I paid $5.60 a page for. The other ones I think were $4.70 a page. But if you need them in a quicker turnaround, like, I think technically her less than 2-day turnaround, she just gave me the middle rate, but really the 2-day turnaround or less or faster is like $7.80 a page. And that's established by the state. That's not like the court reporter that says whatever. The state can set these prices. And New York State chose to set it that way. And they're not the most expensive in the nation, but they're up there. So, not really good for courtroom transparency. And then I like your Courtney Clenny story. I need more on that case as well, as the football player that only got 6 years for a near-death crime. But JM and a pinch finger. So guys, I'm working on something for Courtney Clenny too. I'm not going to talk about it that much because I want to get over to the prosecution's closing argument. But Courtney Clenny case is crazy. I have the body cam exhibits. They're rough to watch. There's 3 of them, and they're at least 1 hour and 51 minutes each, and I'm going through and I have to like blur, like Courtney's got her nipples out in some of them. There's one of them. It's really graphic. I'm gonna find a way to cover them. I've shared the drive if you guys want to go and look at the exhibits. I'm gonna try to post some cleaned up versions. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with one of them though, because it just feels weird to put on YouTube. But I do think it's important to tell you guys while you're here that Christian Novumcelli, in the Courtney Clenny case, Courtney Clenny is the OnlyFans model that killed her boyfriend by, she claims she threw a knife at him. It went 3 inches in above his subclavian artery on his right shoulder. I forget which shoulder. I think it's his shoulder. The side that's, yeah, I think it was his shoulder. And he ends up bleeding so much from it that he succumbs to his wounds. Well, he's passing out by the time the first 2 responding police officers arrive. It reminded me of the Jonathan Majors situation, except obviously there wasn't a death involved. They tell Courtney to get up and put him down. So she's like, but I'm holding him. I need to hold him. They finally get her to get up. He must slump on the ground. You can't see it. They put her in cuffs immediately and they get her out of the penthouse. The officer that I'm watching the body cam on comes back in. You hear Christian groaning a little bit. They're trying to say his name. They're trying to get him to respond. He's groaning a little bit, but he's not, there's no words. He's not responding to questions. And then he goes silent. And then the officer asks for handcuffs. So this man's bleeding from a shoulder stab. So officer asks for handcuffs. You can't see it in full, but it seems logical that he's turning the body, an unresponsive Christian Novumcelli, turning him so his stomach is now on the floor, pulling his arms back, and then handcuffing him. You hear the handcuffs. And then he says later, I handcuffed him. You have someone that's bleeding, an artery is gushing blood, and they're unconscious already. He's not a threat to you. And you manipulate his body, turn him around, and then you pull on, an artery is going to be gushing blood. Now you're pulling something where the cut is. Why did you need to put him in handcuffs? And all I could think of is he was like a more muscular black man. Or honestly, he's the man in the situation. It might not be all those layers. But the girl was already taken out of the penthouse. Nobody was at risk. The medics show up like literally like 30 seconds after that. And the lead medic, it's a woman, she's like, why is he in cuffs? We need those off of him. Like, it's just... So, sorry to go on that tangent right there. But Hazel here had mentioned the Courtney Clenny. And I was editing that like yesterday. And honestly, like, I had to step away from it. It really pissed me off. And we didn't hear that anywhere. At least I didn't hear anywhere that, oh, hey, they actually, while he was bleeding out from the shoulder, they pulled his arm and put him into cuffs. He's the one that ends up dying. They put him into cuffs while he was unconscious. And I'm venting about it because it's really been sitting on my chest. Like, honestly, Barbara in the chat almost sent you a DM to like vent about it this morning, and I was like, if I do, I'll never get anything done. But it reminded me of hearing how we had these police officers show up at the penthouse for Jonathan Majors. And they go up in there and they make their decision. Oh, they make the motion that they're going to arrest Jonathan without even asking questions or investigating anything. And that's why these transcripts are important. So I went on a tangent there. If you're interested in the Courtney Clenny case, stay tuned for that. Yeah, Chillmonger quoting the ABC interview, I was reckless with her heart. And how people say that Jonathan Majors didn't have a great defense team is just fathomable as him being charged, let alone being found guilty. Yeah, and I do think a good part of it, people are reliant on the coverage that that's put in front of them, right? So if the media is saying like, oh, Priya Chaudhry was saying something and the prosecutors are biting back, they're going to interpret that their own way. But I think once you've read some of these transcripts, and especially reading that motion to set aside the verdict, they're doing great work. Reckless with his credit card. Alvin was reckless with his district. Okay, this has to be the new meme here. Anything we make a comment on for future cases, future topics, entertainment topics, we gotta call it out when someone's being reckless with something. And yeah, QT saying it was a great closing. And hey, I'm so late on this. Thanks for becoming a member, Ghost. Make sure you guys are dropping, there's special emojis for you guys. If you're a member, you can choose your own character. And then let's see. So Pam, the police did not investigate anything. Everyone just listened to what Grace said without facts. Yep. And I'm sure it helps when a high-profile nonprofit organization that's sometimes for profit, I think, based on what I was looking at, could be wrong. When they're agreeing to represent you and help you out with press and a pro bono attorney. So I'm going to speed forward and let's get reckless with his diet. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so you guys, I scrolled down a lot I'm going to get back to the closing arguments. We're going to start reading the prosecution's closing arguments. But yeah, so you guys must be reacting to the Clenny stuff. It was crazy, and it's the 3 body cam angle cameras. It happens to be the third one that I'm looking at. The other 2 aren't there for that because it's this officer, the third one that I'm going through to try to edit. It's this third officer that's the one that goes and cuffs him. So I wasn't ready for it because I watched through 2 hours plus 2 hours and 41 minutes from the 2 other body cams, and they're outside while that's happening. So I thought I already got through a lot of the stuff. I'm going to see a lot of the same stuff over and over, and I'm mostly listening for like little details that you couldn't hear on one camera. And then video 3, I'm going through it, and there's like so much that, yeah, it's a lot. I'm going to figure out when to do something like that, and we'll be able to go through it. I think there's some really important stuff in those body cam videos. Unfortunately, 1 or 2 things that may be helpful to Courtney Clenny, who I think her defense sucks. I think it's a stretch for her to go the self-defense route personally. There are 1 or 2 things in these body cam videos that do kind of help her out a little bit. But man, watching these body cam videos, the way she talks and acts is wild. And all I can think watching it is she's not the only girlfriend out here that is in that type of dynamic with a boyfriend. She may be one of the few where it gets to a point where someone ends up dead. But she's not the only person that thinks you can get crazy and react to somebody, and it's fine because you have emotions and you're mad and that justifies it. She's not the only person on this earth that thinks that way. But yeah, let's see. And Shahid says that the closing argument was better than he thought it was going to be. So with that kind of sentiment there, let's look at the prosecution's closing argument. And this one's longer, guys, so let me get some water. Which is weird because I feel like didn't the news, because we had to look at a lot of this through what the news is reporting. And I thought the news made it seem like Priya Chaudhry's closing took way longer. Although Danny did describe that Priya would often, like, hey, she'd say a sentence and then wait and look around the room. So maybe that spanned it out a lot. I don't know. But the defense was 25 pages, prosecution's 45. Let's see what they're saying. Make this bigger for you guys first. Oh, that's the one where I block it. I'm not great at this. Is it this one? Yeah, let's do this one. All right, and again, this is Kelli Galaway that is delivering the closing arguments for the prosecution. Oh yeah, my Goku shirt. I know. I'd wear it more often, except he's in his birthday suit, so I don't want to like wear it to like work meetings. But it's a great shirt for other occasions. And then so Ms. Galloway says, hello everyone. Let me get this off the screen. Hello everyone, good afternoon. I know it's been a long 2 weeks, so I promise I won't take the rest of your day. I want to start out with something that the judge is going to make very clear, and I want to make sure as well. Nothing you just heard is evidence. You watched the evidence in this case. You were picked to be jurors because you were fair and impartial, because you were critical thinkers, and because you were able to sit and listen to every witness testify. Hold on, I gotta pause there. Didn't they specifically have an issue because one person wasn't sitting and listening to the testimony? Objection! No. You were able, I'm going to try to read this without being interruptive. You were able to assess their body language, their demeanor, and you were able to independently listen to what they said, watch the videos that were presented, and make your own determinations, and that is what should control. And if you hear anything, and you think, that's not what I remember, I encourage you throughout all your deliberations to ask for testimony to be read back, to ask to watch videos again, because this is critical. I know the evidence in this case has been quite voluminous. We have seen medical records, a domestic violence expert, we've seen 2 doctors. But what it really boils down to is 4 simple words and 4 simple charges. Control, domination, manipulation, and abuse. The tactics used by those who commit domestic violence against their intimate partners, the same tactics used by this defendant against Grace Jabari. You've heard that on March 25th, 2023, when Ms. Jabari took the defendant's phone to see for herself the evidence of his infidelity, the defendant didn't hesitate to use physical violence. He used physical force to regain control over Ms. Jabari. First, Ms. Jabari testified. He tried to pry the phone out of her hand by peeling back her fingers. After grabbing at her hand, he didn't relent. He didn't give up. He took her right hand and her arm and put it behind her back, while she was still looking away, trying to look at the phone, and began twisting her arm, grabbing and applying pressure to her hands, causing excruciating pain to Ms. Jabari. Not satisfied, the defendant struck a blow to Ms. Jabari's head, stunning her, forcing her to sit back and feel the pain as he took her phone and then pushed at her against her face, against her neck, against her chest. And Ms. Jabari, in a desperate attempt to end the assault, to get answers for the defendant's infidelity, swatted the defendant's arms away, pleading with him to speak with her about the text messages, about who this woman was and what was happening. And when the car stopped, the defendant got out. And when he saw that Ms. Jabari got out as well, he needed to regain control, so he did. He picked her up, with her arms at her sides, and pushed her repeatedly back into the vehicle, on his tiptoes, to get as much leverage as possible, despite being double her weight, significantly taller than her. The defendant's actions on March 25th, 2023, in the County of Manhattan, State of New York, caused Ms. Jabari physical injury, and the focus of this trial is solely about what happened at the center of Canal and Center Street around 12:40 a.m., County and State of New York. Now, she's saying this because on the jury instructions, that's how it's formatted. They're going to ask, do you find that whatever in this location, the County of Manhattan, State of New York, at this time, on or around this time, 12:40 a.m. So she's reading this like it's going to show up on the jury instructions. That way it'll be like a mental heuristic. Oh yeah, that's familiar. That sounds right. You've heard a lot, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's strategy to do that. You've heard a lot about the things that happened after the assault, about actions taken by Ms. Jabari, actions taken by the defendant. That's not what's charged here. And when you deliberate, you're given a form to decide guilty or not guilty. It's going to be about the actions that happened in the car. So that's what I want to focus on. I want you to think about what you just heard. How much of that was focused on what happened in the car? You heard, for instance, arguments that Mr. Bari was the one that attacked the defendant, but you sat through the trial. You didn't see any evidence. That the defendant was attacked whatsoever. Objection overruled. All of the evidence that was presented to you had a purpose, and that purpose was to give you a goal, a comprehensive understanding of the events of March 24th and March 25th. We didn't cherry-pick witnesses. We didn't not call someone because they might say something unfavorable. We wanted you to hear the whole truth. Exactly what each witness told us, we wanted you to hear, because we believe that the whole truth shows proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I submit to you that we have found proof beyond a reasonable doubt of all crimes charged. The defendant's conduct on March 25th is why he stands charged with assault in the third degree, both reckless and intentional. Aggravated harassment in the second degree for the conduct that happened inside that vehicle, and harassment in the second degree for when the defendant repeatedly shoved Mr. Bari back into that vehicle. And because Mr. Bari is a credible witness, objection sustained. So, again, she's reading out all the charges, so she's making sure, jury, this is what you're going to have to decide. But this is interesting here, both reckless and intentional, which, if you're not sure why I'm highlighting that, go check out the motion to set aside the verdict video. It's good. And then so they object, it's sustained, don't vouch. So they tell Galaway, Judge Gaffey says, don't vouch for the witness. But we heard from you, Judge Gaffey, that Mr. Bari is going to tell us what really happened. So you vouched for her. So Galaway continues. As you've seen, Mr. Bari testified for 4 days. I submit to you that she's given candid testimony, corroborated by evidence, that we know what happened inside that car. We know that the defendant committed assault in the third degree and aggravated harassment in the second degree. And because we have a video showing the defendant repeatedly shoving Mr. Bari inside the black Escalade, we know that the defendant committed harassment in the second degree. So why should you believe Mr. Bari? Why do we just know this? But here, at least with harassment, we're like, oh, the video shows it. But here we just say we know. Anyway, let me stop interrupting this lady's closing. Well, she didn't want to report to law enforcement. She didn't call 911, and it's undisputed. We played the 911 call. You've heard it again. And members of the jury, there's nothing wrong with appreciating the fact that the defendant called 911. He had dated Mr. Bari for 1.5 years. He stated on the 911 call he was concerned about her, that she needed medical assistance. That does not dispute the fact that he assaulted her the night before. But this fact, I submit to you, is how do you know that Grace sat on the stand and spoke to you candidly about what happened? She didn't walk into a precinct. She didn't approach a patrol cop on the street and tell her story. She didn't call 911 after she was injured and inform them of what happened immediately. In fact, she testified she was never going to tell law enforcement. She was never going to tell law enforcement. And you heard from Miss Torrielli, in her experience, that's the DV expert witness. Miss Torrielli's experience, that's common. Most domestic violence victims never feel comfortable reporting what happened to law enforcement. And you heard Miss Torrielli explain why individuals who've experienced domestic violence would not feel comfortable. Mr. Bari didn't get to choose the circumstance under which law enforcement learned that the defendant had assaulted her. She didn't get the luxury of emotionally preparing to walk into a precinct. She didn't get to pick a loved one to hold her hand while she did it, and she certainly didn't get to go to the precinct with her attorney like the defendant did. Objection overruled. She was woken unexpectedly in the closet, a woman not wearing pants, surrounded by men, confused. I thought we were only going to hear about what happened in the car. But, okay. Surrounded by men, confused. She had taken sleeping tablets. She could hear the man's voice that had assaulted her the night before as she was surrounded by police officers, and she didn't know why they were there. She told you she disclosed as much as she felt safe doing, but she was afraid he was listening. She didn't want him to get in trouble. And I would remind you again that this case is the people of the state of New York against Jonathan Majors. It is not Grace Jabari versus Jonathan Majors. You heard statements and opening statements that she is a vengeful ex, a woman scorned. This is not consistent with the testimony that you've heard. This is not a revenge plot to ruin the defendant's life or his career. Take everything away from him. Her actions are simply not consistent with a premeditated plan of revenge. When the police came, who she did not call, she avoided speaking with the details of her injuries. And in fact, you heard testimony that she told the officers she didn't know how she sustained her injuries. She blamed herself for the injuries. She told Officer Swain she didn't want to get him in trouble. She was concerned about him, and even when she went to a medical place, a hospital, she still didn't tell them what happened. She told the district attorney's office that she wasn't going to cooperate. You heard that on cross-examination. Is this the actions of someone whose sole intent is to bring a man down, to not even cooperate in the criminal investigation, to barely give police enough for probable cause? She doesn't have anything to gain, I submit to you, from testifying in this case. Oh, if you're in the chat, what happened in like June or something that may have motivated someone that wants to continue being able to visit New York and possibly work in New York? But if something would be in the way from them doing that, from a legal standpoint, what happened that might have helped motivate her to cooperate in the case? I think ADA Aaron Tierney told us that a certain deal was reached with Grace Jabari about pending arrests, because she was going to cooperate, that we made a deal with her, so those arrests basically don't exist. She doesn't have anything to gain, I submit to you, from testifying in this case. In jury selection, you were all told that if you had something private or embarrassing that we had asked, and you didn't feel comfortable speaking about it in the microphone in front of a large group of people, you could approach and speak to us privately in a safe space. Grace Jabari does not have that luxury. She testified for 4 days. She was subjected to nonstop questioning on deeply embarrassing and private topics. She didn't have to testify, guys. She didn't have to come back to the United States and testify. She did have that luxury to not do that. So, Grace Jabari does not have that luxury. She testified for 4 days. She was subjected to nonstop questioning on deeply embarrassing and private topics. In fact, the last slide that we saw was an excerpt from her medical records of what her emotional triggers are and what she is most deeply insecure about. I submit to you that has no relevance to this case. So her emotional triggers are not relevant to this case. But all the things that aren't relevant to March 25th are relevant to the case. All right, lady. Let me stop. But why would she put herself through this? For what? Despite explaining that she's a private person in front of a packed courtroom, in front of all of you, she cried while recounting traumatic experiences that the defendant had inflicted on her. She watched and rewatched again, body-worn camera, until she couldn't take it anymore. Oh, no, she couldn't take it before it even started playing because she didn't want the jury to have to see it. It's not that she had trouble watching it. Oh my God. See, I couldn't, this is why I would never want to be an attorney, a trial attorney. I would be in the courtroom like, bitch, what? Like, you lying. She watched and rewatched again, body-worn camera, until she couldn't take it anymore. Guys, if you went through those transcripts, when did she run out of the courtroom? Was it after she watched and rewatched? Or was it when she heard that it was coming up at all? She watched herself at Lucy's and was asked to identify each and every action she took. She was accused of being characterized as vengeful and a conniving alcoholic. Why would she do that? What does she gain? These are things that I submit to you could consider when assessing credibility. Well, the trial isn't televised, and you didn't think that anybody would get the transcripts because they're expensive. So, I mean, this really isn't a risk for the public to come see this stuff. This wouldn't be a risk at all if this chat room didn't exist. So, I mean, these are things that I submit to you could consider when assessing credibility. And she told you things that she did that you might perceive as embarrassing or inconsistent with a victim of assault. She was forthcoming with it. She told you on direct that she grabbed his phone. I submit to you that the only person who would have known she grabbed the phone is herself. The driver was looking straight ahead. She didn't have to admit that, but it makes sense that she grabbed the phone. The defendant, that morning, she testified, was picking out their children's names. He told her he had bought a ring, and on the way home from a very nice date, a dinner that had been saved, she saw that he was unfaithful. She got upset, and this comports with common sense, and she told you that she was loud. She was upset about it. This is not inconsistent with any of the facts in this case. She didn't minimize her frustration. She didn't pretend she was okay with being cheated on by her partner she was planning on marrying and having children with. Now that would be inconsistent. She told you that she remembered the defendant pushing her in the car, a fact corroborated by surveillance. She told you that she ran after the defendant. She told you that she ran. All right, whatever. That they both ran in front of vehicles as they were jaywalking across the street because she wanted answers. That's what she told you. That when she got out of the car, she wasn't worried about what happened in the car. All she was focused on was her devastation about the infidelity. She needed closure. She told you that she eventually did hit a point where she realized it wasn't worth it. She was acting like herself. She had lost a defendant who had ran away. And that's when she met the three strangers and asked for help getting home. And we have context to view this decision-making through, and that's Josie Torrielli. She spoke to you about how there's not a correct way to respond to trauma, how victims of domestic violence often respond in ways that seem to be abnormal, that every individual would respond to trauma differently. There is no way to know how any individual would respond until it happens. And she told you she went out drinking. That's not a secret. In fact, we showed you on direct examination her drinking. Except you left out the most important part. We showed you on direct examination her signing the receipt. She talked about buying a bottle of champagne. She didn't underplay what she drank. She was honest. She said she drank the tequila shot. She said she drank champagne. If she couldn't remember if she had an extra glass, she would say she couldn't remember. She didn't say no. This is consistent with a woman who just found out that her partner cheated on her. And that's what she was upset about. But we also had the testimony that she watched those videos, all those videos, before she got on the stand. Like that weekend. So, I mean, she had recollection. She also said that she saw all the Lucy's video footage when Insider published them. She was mad at Priya for getting those out there. Even though those are from the Manhattan court. She blamed Priya for it. But those Insider video exhibits were timestamped for Manhattan County Court. So, and that's what she was upset about. She was upset to find out that the person she was going to marry cheated on her, and she had individuals who offered her solace, who offered her support in a time where she felt very alone, and she went and got drinks with them. She didn't stay there until the sun came up. She went for about an hour and a half, and you have the video surveillance of all of this. She had the best time she could. In fact, she did have a good time. She testified that eventually she was able to laugh. She took pictures with them, she had shots, she was dancing. As a dancer, she said that that was a pleasant experience in a very unpleasant night. You heard that because she was smiling and sticking her tongue out in the photo while she was blackout drunk, wasted. I submit to you that the video surveillance shows she wasn't wasted. But it doesn't matter. What matters is what happened in the car that night. She explained to you that she should probably have used her own card. She was thinking about switching cards withdrawn. She wasn't thinking about switching cards at this point in the night. She's a human being who owned and explained her actions to you. She's a human being who owned and explained her actions to you. And she told you that when she left, she called him a lot. In fact, well, she said he tried to call her. In fact, I believe those were her exact words. She told you they even spoke briefly. She hung up on him because after he said he deleted the messages, and she felt she was being childish and tried to reach out again. She reached out a lot. She wanted closure. She didn't downplay it. She didn't pretend she blocked him afterwards. She told you the truth. She didn't exaggerate what happened in the car. What really matters in this case. She provided you with as much detail as she could about what happened in a very short encounter. She repeated the same actions over and over, making the same hand movements, explaining in detail when pain started, when pain stopped, and she didn't pretend to know more than she did. In fact, when she was asked how her ear was lacerated, she said, "I still don't know." And we know the answer why, because on direct examination, she said she wasn't looking. She was looking the other way. She felt a blow across her head on her ear. She didn't turn around. She said on the back of her head. She didn't turn around and see. She didn't pretend to. And she didn't tell anybody the exact mechanism that her finger would be fractured with because she's not a doctor. She detailed every point of pain. She's detailed what she felt the defendant doing to her. She didn't say she saw every bit of it. She didn't say she knows to a degree of medical certainty, like the experts that we have, which action precisely fractured her finger. Members of the jury, I submit to you that if Ms. Jabari was attempting to deceive this jury, it would be easier to say she saw it all, to expand upon it to make it more dramatic, and she didn't. I submit to you that if this was for revenge, if this was a scheme, would officers let her know that he was being charged with strangulation? And you heard those text messages. She wouldn't have denied it. Why would she? If this was a scheme to get him in trouble, she was handed in her lap a charge, and she told consistently, well, that's not what happened. Point blank, those charges should be dropped. Well, so they're using her words from the text message here. So they're relying on what she told Jonathan here. Because that's how she worded it in the text message. Why would she not want that charge there? Because she had just spent 6 hours in the hospital being evaluated and knew there was no, when you discharge, you get a paper that says this is what we saw on you. And there's nothing sitting there. So then on March 27th, you have to go and you have to be like, no, can't do that. Can't say strangulation because I'm here at Bellevue right now, and there's obviously no marks here to corroborate that. So she's not being forthcoming. She just knows that that wouldn't stick anyway. You can read the testimony, the cross-examination where she discussed those text messages. That is not someone who's consistent with a scheme to get someone in trouble. You bring your common sense here. If this was a grand plan, and why did she only tell Jonathan that? There's no, in her closing argument, Kelli Galaway could have made an argument here that, she told us, she was forthcoming with us. She didn't tell anybody. She only told people what actually happened. But instead, they have to focus on, in this closing argument, what Grace Jabbari told only Jonathan. Hey, I'm sticking up for you. I don't want you in trouble. I still love you. Can you please call me? That is not someone who's consistent with the scheme. See, I'm getting mad. That is not someone who's consistent with the scheme to get someone in trouble. You bring your common sense here. If this was a grand plan, why would she fail to cooperate? Why would... But your office is making statements to the media saying, hey, she's cooperating with us. Why would she fail to cooperate? Why would she not say that he strangled her? Because she'd just spent 6 hours in Bellevue and there's no marks on her neck. Why would she not say her injuries were worse? But we know why she wasn't forthcoming. This is the same reason why she was forthcoming about calling 32 times, because she knew that they were call records. You don't need to have access to someone's phone to know the phone records, especially if you have evidence on someone else's phone that there were 32 calls inbound. So, yeah, she wasn't willing to turn over her phone so they could scan and look through her WhatsApp and get certain records from her. They were only able to work with what Jonathan Majors and Holly Blakey put forward. So, but she knew she had to cop to the 32 calls, because even though she didn't want to turn over her device, those records are on another device that they were able to look at and get, voluntary information from. So of course she's going to be forthcoming about those 32 calls because she knows that they know it. So good job, Kelli Galaway, treating the jury like they're dumb, and maybe they are. Why would she not say her injuries were worse? But we know why she wasn't forthcoming, and we know why she wasn't cooperative. I submit to you, because she was allowed to share some of the details about her relationship with the defendant for the limited purpose of providing you with background information. Context. One of those details related to a conversation Ms. Jabbari had with the defendant on September 22nd, 2022. So they put Exhibit 18 up on the screen for the jury. I submit that you should look at these messages because they are very important. We've heard twice, Kelli Galaway has reiterated, the context doesn't matter, it only matters what happened on March 25th in the car. I submit that you look at these September 2022 text messages because they're very important. The defendant told Ms. Jabbari, you have no perspective of what could happen if you go to the hospital. They will ask you questions, and as I don't think you actually protect us, it could lead to an investigation, even if you do lie, and they suspect something. Ms. Jabbari responds, I will tell the doctor I bumped my head if I go. I'm going to give it one more day, but I can't sleep, and I need some stronger painkillers. That's all. Why would I want them? Why would I want to tell them what really happened when it's clear I want to be with you? Members of the jury, you had a chance to read the defendant's response. Ms. Jabbari told the police and medical professionals that she didn't know what happened, and she testified to you the exact reason, to protect the defendant. And then she was cross-examined on it. And what did the defendant do when she pushed back even a little bit, stating she could wait one more day, but she might need medical attention? The defendant threatened suicide. And I submit to you, this was not a mental health crisis. It was a strategically planned tactic to ensure Ms. Jabbari's compliance, just as it had been on the night of March 24th at the dinner at Walter's, when the defendant once again threatened suicide until Ms. Jabbari promised she would keep everything a secret. What did we hear about the play thanks to Daisy? If you're at this point of the video and you have not watched the Was It an Act video, go find that video in the Jonathan Majors playlist, because the play they saw right before this dinner was a play where a woman who the actress looks conveniently like Grace Jabbari. No, that has nothing to slight the actress at all. She plays a character that ends up unaliving herself because her black boyfriend leaves her, breaks up with her. And there's a lot of other similarities. I won't go off on a tangent to list them all out here. But, yeah. Grace Jabbari got up on the stand and said, yeah, it was actually, it was tense at dinner after that play. Jonathan Majors was mad about me and he was threatening to kill himself. And I always have to coddle him when he's feeling that way. So she had to promise she would keep everything a secret, that she loved him, and that he was cared about. And she placated him, and the conversation shifted away from what she was speaking about, and about what the defendant was speaking about. You also learn that Mr. Bari spoke with a woman named Priya Satyani. That's Jonathan Majors' manager. Because Mr. Bari felt that Miss Satyani, the defendant's manager, was a safe person to speak with, to get support from. And the only safe person to speak to inform the defendant that they had spoken, leaving Mr. Bari feeling even more isolated and alone, even though she just had her 7 friends that Jonathan Majors was so controlling about come out to a Mariah Carey concert and spend several days with Mr. Bari on Jonathan Majors' dime, culminating on the night of March 24th. This was a conversation that Mr. Bari testified that she had had many times. She testified it was like opening a wound, that every time he did this, she felt more isolated, like she was personally responsible for his well-being. Ms. Torrielli, the expert in dynamics of domestic violence, explained how these threats could be utilized as a tactic and as a sword in relationships. How it is a form of emotional violence that puts an individual in an impossible situation, where they can choose between protecting themselves and protecting another individual. You guys are moving fast in the chat, I think. So, as you heard on the defense summation, context is everything, which is why I think it's important to speak about the context of this relationship. It is not, I submit to you, Grace's belief that the defendant controlled her in this relationship. It is supported by the evidence. Throughout the relationship, no, Grace testified to that. So, don't try to act like it's not Grace saying it. Throughout the relationship, the defendant exerted control over Grace Jabari, and that control remained when Mr. Jabari was speaking with law enforcement and medical professionals on March 25th, 2023. What were some of those examples that he wasn't even answering in those text messages, guys, because he was already arrested and under holding? But she's just telepathically controlling her. What were some of the examples that you heard? In December of 2021, when Mr. Bari had the audacity to mention an additional partner that she had prior to the defendant, sitting on the couch, the defendant stood over her, towering, screaming at her, saying it was embarrassing that she had dated him, that she has to live with the fact that she had dated this man. Mr. Bari told you that this is the first time she felt scared of the defendant. She told you that she learned to modify her behavior and not to mention prior partners to him as a way to appease him, and the relationship continued. You learn that Miss Jabari attends a music festival every year with her close friends, going on 10 years. Before leaving for that festival, she informed the defendant she would have limited cell service. The defendant understood. But when Miss Jabari did in fact have limited cell service and she was no longer able to wait on his emotional needs, the defendant became upset with Miss Jabari. He told her he was disappointed in her, that she broke his trust, and that she should have turned around when she found out there was no signal. The defendant then refused to engage with Miss Jabari and withdrew all love and affection. Miss Jabari stated she was able to make him feel secure again when she told him she had misplaced his trust by going on vacation with friends and promised she would never go somewhere like this again without him. So, yeah, we're just going to leave out that gap in time where she had to try to chase him down for days. We're just going to leave that part out there, Kelly. Only after this did the defendant re-engage with Miss Jabari. And once more, she learned to adapt her behavior to the defendant's demands, isolating herself further from loved ones and placing him above herself. He flew these same friends to New York City. He paid for them to come to New York City. These same exact friends from the Glastonbury Festival. And in July of 2022, Miss Jabari explained to you that that's when the defendant, in her words, exploded. Now, this was in response, she testified, to her approaching him and asking him to talk about his feelings. She explained that, in her words, he had a violent temper. He began throwing things near her and shouting in her face. She explained how scared she was. And you could see what's in evidence as People's Exhibit 6. Members of the jury, I submit to you that, and this is so, they did not find that he ever intentionally hurt her. So all of this, the jury ends up deciding, no, we don't think he hurt her. All your stories here about how he's a violent man. They didn't give you that verdict, Kelli Galaway. And you heard Mr. Jabari's testimony about how scary this was for her, and how afterwards, the defendant broke down crying, said that he was a monster, and after all of this, Ms. Jabari comforted him. She explained that every time his temper flared, she tried to learn his triggers and adapt, that she felt it was her responsibility to make sure the defendant's anger didn't get to this point. She felt responsible for his emotions. Now, this is critical to contextualize the relationship and understand Ms. Jabari's response to what occurred on March 25th of 2023. She had shaped herself around the defendant to cater to his personality to avoid him becoming angry with her, and she explained she had lost her own self. And when she found out the defendant was not even faithful to her after everything else, she was devastated. So what's the trigger there? It matches what Bellevue said about her triggers. Now, anyone would be devastated to learn that their partner cheated on them, especially a partner they planned a future with. But Ms. Jabari explained she had put her life on the back burner, that she wasn't spending time with family and friends, and that this devastation was unique because of this. But she chose that. She was just told on March 23rd or 21st, a few days before. They're in Sag Harbor. And Jonathan says, hey, don't plan your life around my schedule. Don't plan your schedule around my schedule. She gets so upset by that she goes and drinks a whole bottle of wine at the beach, and then tries to get behind the wheel of a car, leave Jonathan Majors there, and then drive back to New York City. Because they had a discussion about her dropping her whole life to be up under Jonathan Majors 24/7. After he'd already tried to break up with her more than once. She told you about an incident that happened on September 18th, 2022, when she went out to get a drink with her other friend named Grace. When they returned to the house, they were tipsy. Grace is also one of the friends that Jonathan Majors is apparently not allowed. She can't go see anymore, and she's isolated from because she is one of the Glastonbury festival friends that she's known for many years. But she clearly can still hang out with her. When they returned to the house, they were tipsy. She told you how much she drank. It wasn't a secret, and he was upset with her. The next morning, she was going on a walk, and the defendant approached her in a public park, took out the AirPod from her ear, put it on the ground, and stomped on it and began yelling, telling her, in substance, that you're stupid if you don't know what you've done, and demanding that she leaves the apartment at once. She stated she went home as fast as she could, but when she made it upstairs, she heard the defendant and froze, and, grabbing everything from the wardrobe, throwing, moving things, breaking items, taking things to the trash, he was yelling that it was her fault for disturbing the peace. He broke a gift Ms. Jabari had given him by throwing it on the floor in front of her. Ms. Jabari did leave the apartment. Now, what do we see in those text messages? Why would you, from Grace Jabari, saying, I don't know why you would believe that I broke your necklace. Ms. Jabari did leave the apartment, and the defendant reached out, saying he was worried, and this is what I think is important, that she had been telling people about what happened and worrying that it would ruin their future relationship. He promised to make everything better, so she returned home. She said she believed his temper was something he couldn't control and didn't want to have. She wasn't ready to give up on the relationship. Because she had been with friends, she testified she felt a sense of strength that she hadn't felt previously. She didn't want to keep returning home and pretending nothing happened. And the defendant responded that, telling her, this is when she records the great man conversation. And she testified that she did that because she felt empowered after talking to her friends. She comes and decides to record this conversation with a specific start and stop time. She didn't want to keep returning home and pretending like nothing happened, and the defendant responded to that, telling her she's an alcoholic, she's embarrassing, and that she should be waiting at home when he is busy waiting for him. And she recorded a portion of that conversation, and she explained to you why she recorded it, and you could read back those minutes. You, members of the jury, can hear this again to understand the context of the relationship that Ms. Jabari was in. So they put up People's Exhibit 7. Can the members of the jury hear that? I think so. So they play the recording. Members of the jury, I want to make it abundantly clear as to what happened on March 25th. I submit to you that Grace Jabari did not abide by the plan when she took the defendant's cell phone, and I submit to you that she did not abide by his plan when she became upset with him. And Ms. Jabari, we've discussed, was cross-examined on why she didn't tell Chloe, Max, and Shams about the defendant's assault. She was cross-examined on why she didn't tell law enforcement, on why she didn't tell medical professionals. When the defendant had behaved in the way that you were hearing, previously, in public, he had told her not to speak about it to anyone, and that it could ruin their relationship. Ms. Jabari understood this. How did this end? Guys, we're not even halfway through. We're not even halfway through. How did this impact her? She didn't want to tell anyone what was going on. She told you she withdrew from family and friends because she felt like she was lying to them when she was around them. She wasn't allowed to take care of herself. She told you she felt quite dependent on the defendant, despite everything that was going on. Yeah, dependent enough to ask for $20,000 to cover a tax bill from the prior year's income That, when you make money as a freelancer, you put money aside to pay the taxes on it. And you didn't think to do that. And now you had a problem and you reached out after someone had broken up with you asking for some help. Just drop 5 bands to pay for my old tax bill. So she told you she felt quite dependent on the defendant, despite everything that was going on. And when she would try to speak with him about the defendant's temper, he would blame her for making him upset. When you are assessing credibility and making your decision in this case, I submit to you that her actions cannot be taken in an isolated vacuum, ignoring her lived experiences that she told you about, that there is evidence of. I submit to you that Ms. Jabari began running after the defendant because she wanted to know who was on that phone. But because the only person that she testified that she felt she could speak with had abandoned her, had left the relationship after she had isolated herself from everyone else in her life. They were all just there. And he was just telling her, go do something else with your time. Stop making me the center of your life. Oh my God. And I submit to you that's why she kept texting him and wanting calls. I submit to you that Ms. Jabari testified candidly, that you heard her speak for many days, and that you were able to assess her credibility the way she... I'm so glad the jury didn't buy this. I'm so mad they gave any convictions at all. I'm so glad they didn't buy this 45 pages of... Grace Jabari has an excuse for everything that she does, and it's all Jonathan Major's fault. I submit to you that Ms. Jabari testified candidly, that you heard her speak for many days, that you were able to assess her credibility the way she answered questions from me. But also Ms. Chaudhry, the respect that she gave both of us. When she didn't know an answer, she would say she didn't know. It's not really how I remember reading through the transcripts. She would ask for clarification questions. She would even rewatch videos of herself at Lucy's to make sure she pointed out the right person. But even if you don't trust everything Ms. Jabari said, which I submit to you that you should, there is more to find proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the evidence in this case that we've set forth is consistent with Grace Jabari's testimony, and you have so much more. One of the charges that you will learn the defendant is charged with is harassment in the second degree. This is count 4. This relates to what occurred outside the Escalade on the center of Center Street and Canal. Now I want you to think back 1 week ago when you were sitting in these same folding chairs. Oh, they're in folding chairs? Oh. Watching video surveillance for the first time, and what you were thinking when you first saw this video before it was played over and over again, when you watched Ms. Jabari watch this video of herself. I want you to watch this video, and, as counsel stated, she claims it doesn't show her head being hit against the door. Well, that's for you to decide. That's why you're the jurors in this case. I submit to you that Grace Jabari stated that she felt her head being hit against the door, and that the video surveillance is consistent with that, and that the video speaks for itself. Ms. Perez says, let the record reflect, we're starting the video at 2:03. Pause here. Members of the jury, something you were asked to consider was the moving traffic that the defendant was forced to save Ms. Jabari from. I just ask that you consider that when you watch this video. Starting video at 2:11, pausing video at 2:37. Members of the jury, I ask you to consider things such as the color of the light when the defendant gets out of the vehicle, what you can see with your eyes about what occurred. And if you could play, Mr. Perez, starting at 2:37. I submit to you, members of the jury, that harassment in the second degree is on video, and we know it by the defendant's actions that you're going to assess when you watch this video. And I submit to you that the defendant, standing on his tiptoes, pushing his body in repeatedly, over and over again, is consistent with harassment in the second degree, because his conscious objective by manhandling her, by picking up another human being as if she were a doll, was to alarm her, to let her know that she should stay where he tells her to stay. Members of the jury, make no mistake. It would be incredibly annoying and alarming, which is the standard I expect the judge will tell you, for someone to be picked up in the air by both arms and shoved repeatedly back into a vehicle. Now, you heard, it would be really alarming for someone to be lunging and flailing at you, whatever. Now, you heard in the defense's opening that the defendant scooped Ms. Jabari up to avoid traffic. Members of the jury, I submit to you that you should let your recollection of the video control. If you look closely, I submit to you that you will see that the light was red and that he's not looking at traffic right now. But, you would just assume, right? You could just assume that you're in New York, that there's traffic in the middle of the street if you're in a lane, 2 lanes away from the curb. If you look closely, I suspect to you that you will see that the light was red and that he's not looking at traffic right now. I submit to you that he was not concerned that there was oncoming traffic whatsoever. And I want to speak about the testimony of Naveed Sarwar, who is the people's witness. Mr. Sarwar was a privately paid driver paid by the defendant. He is a full-time driver for high-end clients, and he was employed for the defendant on March 24th and 25th. And you saw video surveillance of him interacting with the defendant. You saw him shaking his hand. You saw him speaking with him. I submit to you that when you go back and deliberate, look for when he speaks with Ms. Jabari, when he makes eye contact with her, when he shakes her hand. He testified that she was doing everything. Well, ADA Perez asked, could you see anything? He testified his eyes were on the road. He assumed that she was doing everything, that the only physical altercation he saw was this. The defendant shoving Ms. Jabari back into the vehicle, that the entire time the assault was going on in the back seat, he had his eyes on the road. He testified he couldn't remember how many times the defendant had shoved Ms. Jabari. Despite the video being played, it didn't refresh his recollection. Well, members of the jury, the video undermines his testimony and reveals him to be a biased witness to the man who paid him, contrary to his unreliable opinion. The defendant's intent was to harass, annoy, and alarm Ms. Jabari into submission, a cause that's a natural consequence of picking a human being up and throwing them into a vehicle, something that even the defendant's driver admitted occurred. We've spoken about Ms. Jabari's injuries. I submit to you that Ms. Jabari's injury to her ear is consistent with a blow to the head, as she testified. I want you to think back to then why wasn't she bleeding at that point in time? I want you to think back to the motion that Ms. Jabari made to the right side of her head, and you could ask for the minutes to be read back and read what motion that each witness made. Ms. Jabari testified that the defendant struck a blow with an open hand to the right side of her head. She stated that it was near the back of her head, and she made a swiping motion with an open hand over the right side of her head, touching her ear, and you had the opportunity to see for yourself. We did not pick Dr. Shang as our witness. We didn't pay him $3,700 to testify. That's what I'm assuming the defense must have paid their medical expert witness, Tammy Weiner. He is what is known as a fact witness, and that's just by virtue of him working at Bellevue Hospital and being the attending physician for Miss Grace Jabari on March 25th. He does not personally know Grace Jabari. He's not her primary care physician. He doesn't know the defendant. He has no bias. He doesn't make any money at the end of any of this. He received a subpoena. When Dr. Shang testified, he made a similar swiping motion to Ms. Jabari, and as you heard in defense counsel's opening, he hadn't reviewed Ms. Jabari's testimony. He had only relied on the photographs he reviewed in front of you of her injuries, his own recollection of him actually treating Ms. Jabari, and the medical records, which are his own notes, when coming to his expert conclusions. He said it wouldn't be consistent with a self-inflicted injury, and he testified that hitting Ms. Jabari's head and sliding her ear forward would be consistent with her injury, and that's what she testified to occurring. Ms. Jabari did not testify that the defendant hit her earring at any point, and you could use your common sense. They're sitting in the vehicle, and he's taller than her. Based on Grace Jabari's testimony, the defendant did not strike her from the side of the ear, but in fact struck her in a swiping motion downwards, which would be consistent with a blow that would not only make contact with Grace's earlobe. That's why I submit to you that you don't see any puncture wounds from her earring, because that's not how the defendant struck her. And Dr. Shang testified that an earlobe would not be impacted if the swiping motion was made at the top of the ear. And let's speak briefly about the defense medical expert who traveled for 70 miles to be here. 70 miles isn't a far commute in New York City. Who went to great lengths to agree with the defense counsel, who refused to answer yes or no questions on cross-examination, who, when asked if she was going to be paid for her testimony, said she didn't know. I submit to you that she knew if she was going to be submitting an invoice for sitting in the courtroom for 8 hours. Dr. Shang testified that the ear injury would be consistent with something that hit the ear and pulled the top of the ear forward quickly. He said, quickly, a rapid substantial force. Now, Ms. Jabari, when she testified, stated it was a fast motion that took her aback while gesturing in a swiping motion to the right side of her head. And once again, she did not review withdrawn. Dr. Shang did not review Ms. Jabari's testimony. Dr. Weiner, I'm sure Grace Jabari reviewed Dr. Shang's early statements. Yeah, that they waited for like 4 months to interview the guy or something like that. Dr. Weiner reviewed Ms. Jabari's testimony, although portions of it, she said, but she didn't clarify which portions. Dr. Shang said if it was a blow to the back of her head, he would expect bruising to the back of Ms. Jabari's head. And Ms. Jabari testified that in the coming days, she did in fact have bruising on the back of her head. Members of the jury, because she read what he was going to say in statements. Members of the jury, your common sense tells you that bruising isn't immediate. Have you ever ran into a table? Did you have a dark bruise immediately that same day? As you heard from the defense expert, people bruise and bleed differently, and that's consistent with your own experiences, things you wouldn't leave at the door because you're jurors in this case. Dr. Shang even testified that the photograph of Ms. Jabari's ear is consistent with a blow that would pull on her ear, which is consistent, he stated, with Ms. Jabari's chief complaints in the narrative of the altercation in the medical records that day. This evidence is consistent. It proves the defendant caused the physical injury to Grace Jabari's ear when he struck a blow to her head and ear. Now, Dr. Shang spoke about how this injury would bleed, and Dr. Weiner did as well. But Dr. Shang said that there wouldn't even be bleeding to every laceration behind the ear in the same area that Mr. Bari's injury is, that it would depend on which capillary it hit and which vessels it hit. And once again, you heard from the defense's own expert that everyone clots blood differently. We know Mr. Bari's ear bled. She explained that the blood had congealed to her hair when she woke up. But even when she responded to responding officers when she woke up, a time when all parties agreed that she had a laceration on her ear, she wasn't soaked in blood. Her shirt wasn't drenched, her hair wasn't red, it wasn't running down her neck, and she wasn't actively bleeding, which, I submit to you, is inconsistent with Dr. Weiner's testimony. Miss Blakey explained that Mr. Bari informed her on a phone call that there was blood on her pillow. This shows that Mr. Bari sustained the injury to her ear long enough ago, as this phone call was around 8 a.m., that there was already dried blood. She testified that there was dried blood on her pillow? Or blood on her pillow? Because that's an extra word we're throwing in here to imply something. People's Exhibit 20 in evidence you've seen before. It's a photograph taken by responding officers, and you could see there's still dried blood at this point. I don't know if we have that picture. But despite the fact that this is an open wound, one that hasn't been sutured or glued yet, there's no blood surrounding. I submit to you that she sustained this injury when the defendant assaulted her by striking the blow to her head and ear in the vehicle at Center and Canal. So I'm not sure why that wouldn't be part... Because we have pictures of her ear injury, but none of them are... Oh, they're saying there's still dried blood on her ear at that point, so it's the picture of her ear, not a picture of blood on the pillow. I don't really get this closing argument, because if they're saying, like, it's congealing and then it's bleeding again, it doesn't explain why there wasn't blood way earlier in the night when it was supposed to have happened. Because you have, like, 8 hours that passed now, and there's still no blood on the ear. I submit to you that she sustained this injury when the defendant assaulted her by striking the blow to her head and ear in the vehicle at Center and Canal. This is further corroborated by Sergeant Henson, who does not know either of the parties in this case beyond when he did the arrest. So that was the one that was standing there, like, looking a little like a Home Alone guy. Sergeant Hansen informed you that when he responded on the scene, knowing it was an attempted suicide, when he was walking in the bedroom, he was looking around for an indication, I don't know how to say that word, indicia of pills. So indication of pills or something that would lead to suicide. He independently noticed blood at the top of the comforter where he testified that one would put their head. He testified credibly. There's no reason, objection, that's overruled. I submit to you that there's no reason he would make up such a specific fact. Now, I want to speak about the injury to Mr. Bari's finger. Dr. Sang stated it was unlikely for an injury to be caused by exerting pressure, twisting the finger or pulling, but acknowledged it was medically possible. He further stated that a fractured finger, just the middle finger, is not consistent with the fall because you would see a more severe fracture or bruising on other parts of the hand. He did say that a fracture is most likely caused from direct trauma to the hand or finger, so he stated earlier. She didn't say the word striking, and he did say the word striking, so we left that word out. Remember, Mr. Bari didn't testify as to which of the specific mechanisms fractured her finger. She didn't sit on the stand and tell you she knew which one did it. And, as we will discuss, the people's burden is to prove assault in the third degree, which is physical injury or substantial pain. Mr. Bari testified that she had experienced substantial pain in her finger, and that she experienced that for weeks afterwards. We know her injury was caused, and we know who caused it, because she testified that when she left Walters from dinner, her hand was perfectly fine. She was in the car ride back to Manhattan. When she was at Center and Canal, she was experiencing pain in her fingers and her hand, and her arm and her ear. And then after that altercation, throughout the night, she began to see swelling. She began to see redness, and it began hurting. Mr. Bari testified she had no other violent interactions. She wasn't assaulted by someone else, and her movements are largely tracked through video surveillance. I submit to you that Mr. Bari's right middle finger was injured in the car by the defendant's actions. Now, Dr. Shang explained that the appearance of the injury would develop over time, and this is consistent with your common sense, members of the jury. Soft tissue, as he explained, takes time to swell. The bruising may get worse over a number of hours, up to 24. And importantly, what I want you to focus your attention on is that Dr. Shang testified that the injury she suffered is consistent with her chief complaint when she reported to the hospital on March 25th. Now, you heard about an additional injury to her arm when she experienced what she testified as excruciating pain when the defendant used his hands to twist her arm. You heard something called a head-to-toe examination. You heard that it's actually not in the medical records that are in evidence. Dr. Shang does not remember the specifics of the head-to-toe examination and doesn't have an independent recollection of doing one. I submit to you that because Mr. Bari is candid with you, you know she suffered physical injury. Because when she testified that when the defendant grabbed and pulled her arm, she said she experienced substantial pain to the extent that this wasn't divulged to medical staff. It's consistent with her testimony regarding her relationship with the defendant and her instructions not to tell medical staff. And at the moment when it occurred, she described it as excruciating pain, which I submit to you is substantial pain. I would also submit to you that not all injuries result in bruising. You know that from your common sense. You know you could experience pain without having a hand mark or bruise later. Now, we've seen extensive video surveillance from Lucy's of Ms. Jabari, so let's talk about her injuries at Lucy's. First, I want to make clear and clarify something. You could see all the video surveillance in this case, all of it. You could watch every hour of Lucy's in the deliberation room. Isn't it an edited compilation, though? So why would she say all of it? And her whole premise of this closing argument is the counsel just lied to you or didn't use your own eyes because we don't know if what defense just told you in their closing is true and it's not evidence. But here we're hearing you can see all the video surveillance in this case, all of it. You could watch every hour in the deliberation room if that's what you feel you need to do. But they didn't put together all of the video footage in their compilation. So, whatever. You can watch every hour of Lucy's in the deliberation room if that's what you feel you need to do to make an assessed decision in this case. In fact, what's in evidence as People's Exhibit 2 is all of the video surveillance from Lucy's. It's a stipulation of the parties so that you can look at everything you see if you wish. So, Exhibit 2. I do think that was actually missing from... Interesting. I do think that was actually missing from the 19 exhibits that they've released. So maybe that's not out. But apparently it's something that's coming in because it's a stipulation of both parties. So now Dr. Weiner testified that you could actually consume enough alcohol to not feel pain at all, but that's not what Ms. Jabari said happened. She said she was feeling pain while she was at Lucy's, that she first started noticing a difference in her finger on the car ride to Lucy's. When she was there, she felt pain. She was able to push it out of her mind. The pain was manageable, and it didn't prevent her from enjoying herself. She testified she has a high threshold for pain. She's a professionally trained ballet dancer who has danced in pain previously. She testified it was nothing she couldn't handle. Dr. Shang also testified that alcohol decreases pain perception, and something that's not in dispute, members of the jury, is that she drank at Lucy's. She told you herself. In fact, she's not screaming in pain, wincing, or crying in pain at Lucy's while having a hairline fracture on her right middle finger does not undermine the fact that Ms. Jabari already sustained a physical injury prior to arriving at Lucy's. And you know this because of the testimony of Chloe Zoller. Now, Chloe Zoller has no bias in this case. She's not friends with Ms. Jabari. She's not friends with this defendant. In fact, I submit she likely didn't want to come here to testify. Objection overruled. She met Ms. Jabari that night, invited her to go to a birthday party that she was already attending. They drank together, spent a few hours together, and she explained to you she observed Ms. Jabari's demeanor change. At Lucy's, she became calmer and happier. She explained it was very dark at Lucy's, but what is critical, Ms. Zoller explained to you that Ms. Jabari told her that her finger was hurting. Ms. Zoller, in response, remembers grabbing a piece of ice and placing it on one of Ms. Jabari's fingers. I submit to you that you don't need to know which finger. This is a very specific memory to have. Why would she be icing a different finger? This is after arriving and before ordering champagne. And Ms. Jabari, who is not friends with Ms. Zoller, set forth an identical timeline. She testified that she remembers holding ice to her finger at Lucy's because it was in pain. She remembers mentioning it to people, that her finger was starting to change, but she had also explained she was able to use it. She had a range of motion, she was just experiencing some pain. I submit to you that Chloe has no reason to be dishonest with you, to commit perjury, no reason to fabricate such a specific event. Ms. Jabari has no reason. And to be clear, I believe the exact statement was, I think I remember asking for the piece of ice. And Chloe Zoller had an interview in April with the prosecutors. where she may have been asked about ice, and that's why she might remember something about a piece of ice, but didn't remember any details of anything with it. Just saying. So I don't think that that's perjury. I think that that's someone having recall about something, but it might not be from the moment of the incident. It might be from sometime in April where they were being asked questions about the incident. At this point, we have observed Ms. Jabari on video surveillance, which you could watch from the time she exited the car and was thrown back in the vehicle to the time the defendant left. She gets in the car ride where she's observed with both Max Manning and Chloe Zoller, who testified, who didn't see her get any injuries. They testified to that. She gets to Lucy's and she's on video again. I submit to you the evidence shows her finger injury had to be sustained in the car due to the defendant's actions, and you saw a photograph that Ms. Jabari and Ms. Zoller took at Lucy's. I'm showing you what's already in evidence as People's Exhibit 10. Now we heard evidence of doctors saying that the swelling and bruising may be worse over a number of hours. I submit to you that this is consistent, as we've spoken about with common sense and life experience. And what's great about this is if the whole car chase scene, they get in and out of the car, there's 3 different parts where they're in the car. That's all like a 10-minute span of time. The second time where they're in the car, where Grace Jabari says, she testifies that she strikes him with her right hand. Her right hand, that's where this fracture is. That's when she rips the coat and the buttons. You know, that's only minutes apart. So if the bruising, if the prosecutor's like, oh, it makes sense, the timeline adds up that this bruising happened in the car, and that's why we're seeing bruising like 3 hours and then 8 hours later. Well, if the injury actually happened a minute later than car part 1, the bruising should be on that same timeline, right? It would add up, but prosecution's arguing that, no, forget that Grace Jabari testified she didn't want him leaving the car, so she was striking him with her right hand. It happened in the first car, and it was all his fault. But it's consistent with the timeline of the bruising that they're laying out here. Ms. Jabari indicated that in this photograph, there's darkening to the tip of her right middle finger. Ms. Zoller indicated to you that this club is very dark. They're at the DJ booth, as we saw in video surveillance, surrounded by others, so we are now relying on flash photography to discern what her hand looked like at this point in time. But I submit to you that you can see darkening around her right middle finger. We know from testimony that this was after Zoller provided Ms. Jabari ice, after she had already expressed feeling pain in her finger. And when you go back to deliberate, I want you to think about why would Ms. Zoller, of all people, not tell the truth about something that specific. Now, defense argued that Ms. Jabari couldn't have an injury because the video surveillance at Lucy's is wholly undermined by Ms. Jabari's range of motion. After all parties agree that her finger's fractured. Critically, Dr. Shang testified that on March 25th, after she had an x-ray, after we know her finger was fractured, Ms. Jabari was still able to move her finger normally. That was his testimony, that she had a full range of motion. And you have medical records and evidence that you could review. You could ask for a readback on Dr. Shang's testimony. Now, Dr. Shang knows this because he personally treated her that day. It's noted on his medical records what he himself wrote. Dr. Shang said a patient typically could still move the finger with some pain and discomfort. So he did that part of the examination thoroughly. But the other thing he didn't do thoroughly. But when our other witnesses don't know everything 100%, they're not credible, right? Like Narwar Savid, not credible anymore. But Dr. Shang doesn't do a head-to-toe examination. It's fine. This other thing is he knows everything about. Dr. Weiner, who was paid thousands of dollars by the defense, testified it would be extremely painful for Ms. Jabari to grab her purse, sign a check, move her hand across her ear, and put her hair up with a hairline fracture. But what you have is body-worn camera in this case from Officer Lucero. You can ask for this when you're in the deliberation room, and ask for it to be played as many times as you like. I'll publish to the jury a small portion of People's Exhibit 24 in evidence. Now your decision of what's in the video controls. But I submit to you that Ms. Jabari is able to use her right middle finger, despite having a fraction to her finger. Yeah, she's laughing through it all. Starting at 6:24. Starting at 6:11, going to, which is like, like where's the substantial pain then? Substantial pain's an element of this assault charge, but whatever. Starting at 6:24, starting at 6:11, going to 29 minutes. I submit to you that you can see Ms. Jabari able to run her fingers on her face without screaming in pain. Then they play to 29:03. I submit to you, inconsistent with Dr. Weiner's testimony, Ms. Jabari is able to sort through her bag with her right hand. She even touched her right ear. I submit to you. Going to 32:18, starting at 32:11. I submit to you that Ms. Jabari can use her right hand to put on the shoe at this point with her fractured finger. So they're arguing that she was experiencing substantial pain, but then they're also arguing she was fine. She was able to do this without feeling much pain. Going to 3450. Pausing 3451. I submit to you Ms. Jabari can hold her hand that you saw when she was at Lucy's with her right hand. I submit to you that Ms. Jabari can fix her hair and tie a scarf with her fractured middle finger. Hold down her scarf. I submit to you that you could see Ms. Jabari's finger curved inward as she is holding her sunglasses and pull out items from her bag and adjust them, even scroll on her phone. So, pausing at 3632. You could watch as much of this as you want. Officer Lucero himself testified that she and was able to explain what he saw Ms. Jabari doing. To his recollection, he remembered Ms. Jabari holding her phone with her right hand, bending her fingers, and even reenacted it all for you. We know there's nothing inconsistent about being able to sign a receipt, like Dr. Wiener said at Lucy's, because we know Ms. Jabari filled out a domestic incident report at the hospital, 3 lines of it, with her right hand. And we know she did so because she testified to it, but we also know she did so because Officer Lucero watched her do it, and he testified to it. So they pause at 3650. I submit to you that the timeline of the evening corroborates with Grace Jabari's suffering physical injury inside of the vehicle as a result of the defendant's actions. Holly Blakey testified that on March 25th, she received a phone call from Grace Jabari about 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. She testified that Ms. Jabari was crying, sounding broken, and traumatized. Ms. Blakey corroborated that Ms. Jabari sent photos of her injuries to her finger and ear at 8:14 a.m. and 8:16 a.m. to Ms. Blakey, and that's in evidence as People's Exhibit 14. You have the opportunity to review this screenshot for yourself. I submit to you it's not in question that Ms. Jabari was injured when she took those photos, and I submit to you that at the bottom of the paragraph, you could see dried blood, so you know it was sent at 8:16 a.m. It had already been bleeding. Video surveillance from the Chelsea Mercantile shows Grace Jabari arriving at the apartment building at 3:23 a.m. Ms. Jabari testified she didn't fall or otherwise injure her finger, her ear, or her arm between 3:23 and 8:14 a.m. This dried blood tells you 2 things. It tells you that the injury from earlier is consistent with Ms. Jabari having been injured in that vehicle. And second, but not in the vehicle 1 minute later where she testifies that she's hitting him with the... only in the vehicle 1 minute before. And second, it places the injury before officers respond to the scene. She couldn't have injured it by fainting in the closet. And in addition to Grace's testimony in and of itself, there are other witnesses that support that she knew she didn't injure it by fainting because she knew she didn't faint. In addition to Grace's testimony in and of itself, there are other witnesses that support which she would not be able to fabricate this story. Ms. Blakey corroborates that the defendant assaulted Grace Jabari and caused her injuries because context is everything. At approximately 8 a.m., Ms. Jabari told Ms. Blakey on the phone that the defendant injured her at 8 a.m., hours before law enforcement arrived, and you could have that testimony read back to you. Ms. Blakey got on a plane to New York. She left her 2 young children in a different country. What incentive does she have to come to the United States to commit perjury? Well, she could hang out with her manager, Ben Toddy, and grow her business with a free flight paid for by the DA. Or she thinks she's being a good friend to someone that hit her with the okie doke, right? She genuinely thinks she's being a supportive friend because she believes the lies that she's being told. Officer Swain's testimony corroborates what Miss Grace Jabari was not interested in cooperating. She was whispering, seemed scared, crying, asking if the defendant was outside, and said that Miss Jabari had a look of shock and fear when she saw the defendant enter the closet. And Officer Swain specifically told you that Miss Jabari was concerned about the defendant getting in trouble. This flies in the face of what you heard in opening statements, that Miss Jabari is a vengeful ex-girlfriend. If she wanted to get him in trouble, she would have broadcast what he did. She wouldn't be concerned about his well-being. She would be calling the police herself. And the testimony of Miss Blakey supports Miss Jabari's testimony about how this abusive relationship impacted Miss Jabari day in and day out. Miss Blakey is a good friend of Miss Jabari, but I submit to you that her testimony was credible. Miss Blakey wasn't afraid to be forthcoming about positive things about the defendant, that he was loving and charming when she first met him. But she also told you that throughout the relationship, she observed Miss Jabari go out less, go drinking less, work less, have less of an interest in herself. But Jonathan Majors kept telling her to go do this. Go do this. A stark contrast to who she was prior to this relationship. You heard that the message that Miss Jabari sent was dramatic, and I submit to you that Miss Jabari did not intend it as a suicide text because the individual she sent it to, she had been dating for a year and a half, someone who knew her very well. What was his response? It's in evidence as People's Exhibit 4K. Did you leave the keys? Goodbye, Grace. This is not the response of someone who believes their partner just committed or is attempting to commit suicide. I submit to you that this text means exactly what Mr. Bari said it did. I'm done with the relationship. I'm not leaving you a note. There's no closure. Goodbye. And video surveillance from the Mark Hotel shows the defendant taking his time, playing People's Exhibit 5 at 2100. Members of the jury, this video surveillance of the defendant at the hotel that he went to that morning, after having received the text message from Mr. Bari responding. Members of the jury, this is video surveillance of the defendant getting a coffee that morning. There's nothing wrong with getting a coffee in the morning. I'm simply showing you this to show that Mr. Bari sent a text message to someone she knew very, very well and did not read it as alarming, as defense counsel suggested. Well, no, the point is you get somewhere and you're locked out and there's not someone not responding, and then you think about what the last message said. And then you're like, oh shit. So he wouldn't realize that until he got to the point where the door's locked. We have video surveillance of the defendant leaving the Mark Hotel, and we have video surveillance of him arriving back at the Chelsea Mercantile. We know he arrives back an hour later from the Upper East Side of Chelsea. He wasn't in a rush. Defense counsel seems to imply that Mr. Bari was faking being unconscious, that if she fainted in the closet, her phone would have been in the closet. But then we learned her phone was likely in the closet because she came out with it. I submit to you that this is not inconsistent. That's not what the argument was. The argument is not... This doesn't, rebuke the argument. It supports it. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it must have been in there because she does come out with it. But we don't see it there. That's the point, is that, it's obviously in there. The defense says it's obviously in there. But the problem is she was just on it and suddenly it's not visible anywhere. She goes and gets it while everyone's waiting in the bedroom. Kelli Galaway. But then we learn her phone likely was in the closet because she comes out with it. I submit to you this is not inconsistent with the evidence, that Mr. Bari was not faking being unconscious, that she told you, very candidly, that she had taken sleeping pills after drinking, and she remembers falling asleep on the bathroom floor, and then she remembers being waken up, surrounded by police officers. No, say where, Kelli. Where did she actually wake up? What really matters is what happened in the car. It doesn't matter if she fainted in the closet. It doesn't matter if she fell asleep in the closet. It doesn't matter if her phone was in the bathroom or the closet. What matters is if, although we're 40 pages in, it doesn't matter if her phone was in the bathroom or the closet. What matters is if the defendant assaulted her on March 25th, 2023. And we know that her injuries are consistent with the fact that she was assaulted by the defendant on March 25th, 2023, and we know she had these injuries prior. The minute prior. These injuries had to have happened in car 1 and not car 2, according to Kelli Galaway. It had to have been only that one moment. And we know she had these injuries prior. We know she messaged them to Holly at 8:16 a.m. with dried blood already, and we know she complained of finger pain to Chloe. You would have to believe she's a criminal mastermind. She's leaving breadcrumbs to strangers that she will never see again. No, we just believe that she had the injuries because she was hitting him. I want to speak briefly about the witnesses that defense counsel chose to call. They do not have to put on a case, but they can. We were able to speak with Mr. Rispoli, who is the defendant's agent. I submit to you that the defendant's agent is the only person you've heard testimony from stating that the defendant was banging on the door. There's no other testimony corroborating that, and that individual is someone who makes a lot of money with the defendant, and he wouldn't admit it. So does Ben Toddy and Holly Blakey with Grace Jabari. Objection overruled. That's a fair inference. Go ahead. He said that he has a contract independent, almost implying that if he had unsuccessful clients, his business wouldn't change. I submit to you that he could assess credibility, that you could assess credibility, and you could assess if people have a financial stake in the outcome of this case. We've spoken about Dr. Weiner, how her answers were not consistent with the evidence that we see on surveillance, that she had been given cherry-picked evidence from the defense counsel, and paid a very large sum of money to come testify. And I submit to you that she was not testifying for free as a pro bono charity organization. So the implication... Quiet part out loud. And we heard from Detective Mejia, who didn't tell us much of anything except for the defense counsel filed a report against Mr. Bari 3 months after the incident occurred, that the defense counsel walked into the precinct and filed a report. Now you learn from Ms. Torielli what DARVO is: denying, attacking the credibility, and reversing victim and offender. When I submit to you that, thank God the jury didn't believe this shit. I submit to you that Mr. Bari's arrest was a perfect instance of Darvo. And Mr. Bari was subjected to questioning about an arrest that had been dismissed, that was filed months later by his counsel. And they would still have you believe that she is standing here and lying to you, that she would subject herself to that, for what? I submit to you, for nothing. The facts are clear in this case. What does this mean legally? Now the judge is going to instruct you on the law that there are 4 charges in each's elements, and it's my job and AD Perez's job to prove every single one beyond a reasonable doubt. Defense has no obligation whatsoever. It falls fully on the people. The first degree is assault in the third degree, intentional. We have to prove to you that the defendant intentionally caused physical injury to Mr. Bari, and that is substantial pain to her right forearm, substantial pain in the laceration to her ear, substantial pain, bruising, and swelling to Mr. Bari's right middle finger. So they're saying it could apply to anything. And our burden is to prove that at least one of those injuries to Mr. Bari occurred at the hands of the defendant intentionally. And I submit to you, we have proven all 3 of them. Intent is the defendant's conscious objective or purpose, and you could infer intent. Based on Mr. Bari's testimony, we know that the defendant's intent because she told us. She said, and you could have it read back, that he was intending to cause her pain, that the pain was excruciating, that he was trying to hurt her. We are not required to prove to you how Mr. Bari's finger was fractured. We are only required to prove to you that she experienced physical injury or substantial pain, and I submit to you that we have done so. This is why that justification charge not being read is so important. Because this is saying right here, it doesn't matter how it occurred, or really even exactly when, if it happened in car 1 or car 2, because that's close in time. It's in the same instance. They're still kind of like running and cooling down from each other. We don't have to prove to you how it was fractured, but just that she was experiencing physical pain or substantial pain. If you do not find the defendant intentionally assaulted Mr. Bari, you could look at assault in the third degree, reckless. And now this is all constrained to what occurred in the car. I'm so mad about this. They're like, it really says you can find him guilty as long as she experienced pain. If you do not find the defendant intentionally assaulted Mr. Bari, you could look at assault in the third degree, reckless. And now this is all constrained to what occurred in the car. If you believe the defendant recklessly caused these injuries to Mr. Bari, even if he didn't intend to, then you must find guilt on assault in the third degree. And I submit to you that we have proved beyond a reasonable doubt that he did so. Recklessness means that he is aware of the risk and he consciously disregards it. And we saw how he treats Mr. Bari moments after the assault, picking her up like a doll and throwing her in the car. Conscious disregard is a perfect word. Now, this, when anyone actually asks you what he was actually convicted of with this assault charge, it's just this. No intent. They only found this sentence. We are only required to prove to you that she experienced physical injury or substantial pain. That's it. That's what the jury decided. That's why it was a split verdict, because they weren't told that if you think it was inflicted, if there's any justification here, you should find not guilty. They weren't given that justification. This is insane. We are also charging aggravated harassment in the second degree for the same incident that happened inside the car, and we have proven the injuries to Mr. Bari show that he was intending to annoy, harass, or alarm her by striking her or otherwise subjecting her to physical conduct, as we alluded to earlier. The defendant caused physical injury to her ear, arm, and finger. In this charge, we assert that there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You only have to find that the defendant's conduct in the car caused one of 3 injuries: the right middle finger, the right ear, and the right arm. And finally, harassment in the second degree. We allege the defendant with intent to harass, annoy, or alarm Grace Jabari struck, shoved, or otherwise subjected her to physical contact. Now this is related to the defendant, on video, repeatedly shoving Mr. Bari back into the vehicle, moments after he had just assaulted her. I submit to you. Now, this charge doesn't require physical injury, legally speaking. We don't have to prove that Mr. Bari hit her head, or that she was hurt when the defendant shoved her inside the vehicle. Our burden is to prove that with intent to harass, annoy, or alarm, he subjected her to physical contact by striking or shoving her, which, I submit to you, you've all seen in this trial already. This is not a he said, and hold on, we're going to break this down, because he was found, he got assault in the third degree reckless. And now all of this is constrained to what occurred in the car. Hold on. Because I got confused reading this. This is the same paragraph. Go through this with me again, guys. Assault in the third. He was cleared of this intentional one, right? Up here. So he was cleared of this intentional one. This doesn't matter. They're saying if you do find him intentional, this intentional one, you know, it's involving the finger fracture. But then they say, if you do not find the defendant intentionally assaulted Ms. Jabari, you can then look at assault in the third degree reckless. But let's look at this. And now this is all constrained to what occurred in the car. In the car. But then they also say, and we saw how he treats Miss Jabari moments after the assault, picking her up like a doll and throwing her into the car. Conscious disregard is the perfect word. They're conflating two moments in time with this charge. I would argue that the prosecutor made the argument here. They're supposed to be arguing, hey, you need to consider assault in the third degree reckless, the reckless charge for the assault. If you don't think it's intentional, again, this is only relating to what happens inside the car. But in the same paragraph, they use him picking her up in that frame where they're stepping outside of the car to say, yeah, that's conscious disregard. They're conflating the two different instances here for the third degree reckless assault charge. They shouldn't do that. Because you're basically telling them you could find guilty on third degree reckless assault for any of those moments in time or alleged injuries. Oh, I'm not confused by it. They're only supposed to attach this charge to the specific what's in the car. But then they're blurring the lines here. So I hope they call that out on appeal. Anyway, and then he was cleared of the aggravated harassment, but he was found guilty of the harassment in the second degree for the intent to harass, annoy, or alarm by just shoving her into the vehicle moments after he had just assaulted her. So my point is, these two charges, the harassment are supposed to be the ones that are about in the door frame. And they only say, hey, harassment in the second degree, but not the aggravated harassment. But this assault one here, this unintentional, this reckless assault, the jury may have found that based on this. Well, you saw how he picked her up. That's clearly conscious disregard. But really, they're only supposed to consider this charge for what happened inside the car, not inside the car and the moment after. Anyway, this is not a he said, she said case. Well, yeah, because he didn't testify. So this is a she said plus, because you have so much more. And it supports the fact that Grace Jabari suffered, so they're applying additional Me Too's. And it supports the fact that Grace Jabari suffered physical injury at the hands of the defendant while inside the black Escalade on the corner of Canal and Center on March 25th, 2023. You were asked why you were here. Because domestic violence is serious. Because I'm so glad they cleared him of the intentional stuff. They didn't buy any of this. The jury didn't buy any of this. Because domestic violence is serious. Because victims of domestic violence struggle to report. And when they do, they're critiqued on how they report. Yeah, you literally critiqued Jonathan Majors on how he reported in your closing argument, Kelli Galaway. You literally described this of Jonathan Majors in your closing argument as the victim. And Miss Jabari did not want the defendant to get in trouble. She didn't ask for him to be arrested. She didn't ask to cooperate with the prosecution. The state of New York is the one who is prosecuting the defendant, but we have proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt that she was subjected to shoving by the defendant when he could no longer control her, when he couldn't control a response to his infidelity. So, I ask you to bring back the verdict that is demanded by justice and supported by the evidence, and that is a verdict of guilty on all counts. Thank you. So they're asking for an incontrovertible verdict. They're not even offering an either or. They're saying here we want guilty on all counts. That's also a problem. Because you can't have the intentional and the reckless at the same time for the same instance. And yet they specifically ask for all four. Oh, there's a lot of problems with this. Oh, I can't wait. I don't want to see it go to appeal. But kind of assuming it will, unless Judge Gaffey is like, yeah, you know, this motion to set aside the verdict makes sense. I'm going to criticize myself and approve it. This is problematic. Someone get this to Nate the lawyer. Nate the lawyer loves to talk about you can't charge these 4 things. That's a problematic line right there. Let me see what you guys are saying. Oh my gosh, you guys. That was long. I swear the media reports said that Priya Chaudhry had a long closing thing. That's what I remember. You know, I'm going to kind of work backwards with the comments. So, weren't they not allowed to say victim? She sure alluded to it. Yeah, and she kept saying domestic violence and all these different terms. We got Darvo in there. Um, and then what about her chasing him? No, in Kelli Galaway's closing argument, she actually says, Grace was forthcoming with you. She admitted she ran. So, and the missing paragraphs of jury instructions. Yeah, so let's go. You guys are making, I see some comments here about the nonprofit. I think I just scrolled weird. Yeah, because Sanctuary for Families needs the money. Why would you do this, right? So guys, if you are new to this, Sanctuary for Families of New York is a nonprofit that represents and does advocacy work for victims of domestic violence. Shout out to them for the causes that they are actually helping. However, they are also a political lobbyist. They donate a lot of money to politicians. And when there's a big case like this, they center a lot of press around it. There's incentives for them to take on a case because it will bring more money into their doors. More publicity means more fundraising opportunity. Sanctuary for Families helped Grace Jabari. They appointed a pro bono attorney, Ross Kramer, for her. Ross Kramer's the one where we get that statement from that, hey, the district attorney's office promised Grace Jabari no legal repercussions whatsoever in response for her cooperation in testifying against Mr. Majors. So there's that. So over this case, and I hope Jonathan is able to clear his name. Me too, every day. And Barbara says, all she wears is Liberty print button dress. What did I miss? Are we talking about being found in the closet? Daisy says, and we heard from Detective Mejia, who didn't tell us much of anything except for that the defense counsel filed a report against Miss Jabari. Because that's all he could get into with sustained objections. Exactly that, Daisy. B. Smith says, the court was in on it, and I could stop reading that comment there and be like, yeah, I agree. The court was in on it, and it's why he said she would tell the jury what really happened. Yeah, like that line always sticks out to me. The judge is just like, no, she's really going to tell you what really happened. And then Kai's saying wow, and I don't know exactly what part was a wow, but there were a few. Oh, it must have been, wow, pro bono charity organization. She went there. That's what I'm saying. You're saying the quiet part out loud. And when did they prove that? This is another thing. I don't know exactly what it pertains to, but there's a few things that it could pertain to. Yeah, the bedroom and bathroom's commonly confused, especially when you're like puking and having an accident in the bed and then trying to get over to the bathroom. I submit to you that you don't need to know which finger. I mean, I kind of get the point, right? Like, why would someone ask for ice? I think there is an alternative explanation there that Chloe did, because remember, her testimony wasn't, according to the news reports from that day. We got some actual good quotes from, it wasn't People, and it wasn't Insider. Maybe it was Insider. But we got some paragraphs of testimony from Chloe's testimony, even though we don't have the full transcripts. I did a video on it, and I only read quotes that I was able to find from court reporters, plus some stuff that Danny told us. But there was actually good coverage on that day. And Chloe, on cross-examination, was like, oh, I don't really know. Like, she wasn't sure of anything. And the first thing she says when she starts testifying is she was already intoxicated by the time that her and her friends came down to get to the sidewalk where they end up bumping into Grace for the first time. And again, I think recall of icing a finger, I think she very well could have recall, but it could be because she remembers something that was discussed on April 4th. I think it was April 4th. April of 2023. She had an interview with the district attorney. So, other than that, I still think, yeah. I personally think, guys, you've heard me say it, I think Grace Jabari hurt her finger by grabbing at Jonathan Majors in car park 2. Because that's where she testifies she used her right hand to strike him, and he's wearing like a denim jacket that's all ripped up, and the buttons are popped. That's not an easy type of fabric to just snag and rip. Like, you're swiping at someone and pulling down on it. Sounds like you could get a fracture. And again, that was a minute after car part 1. So, Dr. Shang had to rely on the arrow the X-ray tech made. This is a joke. Yeah, that's true. So, in the courtroom, Danny was saying that when they had the X-ray up on the screen, they kept asking Dr. Shang, like, well, can you tell us where the fracture is? Can you show us where the fracture is? And he had to keep saying, well, it's where the radiologist arrow is pointing to. You know, one would think that maybe they could have had a piece of evidence that didn't have arrows on it, but what's one more cue to to prod the jury towards a certain conclusion? So Dr. Shang doesn't remember specifics of the head-toe exam injury, but the jury must blindly believe Grace Jabbari because Kelli submits that Grace Jabbari is candid. Therefore, they must know that she suffered physical injury. And that's the thing, that was weird about this closing argument. We see Kelli Galaway, let me be a normal size here. We see Kelli Galaway say on one end, all you need to know is that there was substantial physical pain, excruciating pain. That's all you need to find. But at the same time, half of her closing argument switches to, she wasn't in any pain, see? That's why she was still able to use her injured finger. And that's why you should still understand that the injury actually occurred early in the night. Because the pain didn't have to register. Dr. Shang says it's normal for it to kind of be delayed and take some time. So she just wasn't feeling any pain. That's why she's still able to sign credit card receipts. But then at the same time, you're telling us she was feeling substantial pain the whole night. Because that's an element of the charge you're trying to get them to convict on. Like, she spoke out of both sides of her mouth on that throughout closing. But whatever. Oh, we got a new one. I don't think I've heard disgrace fakari. Yeah, false memories are easy to have. Just ask Gracie. And then, oh, you guys are so good. I love the live chats. You guys notice so much. So she should have stayed in the car and not have followed him to keep assaulting him, right? That would have stopped things. That probably would have stopped things before she actually hurt her finger in car part 2. I mean, it could have been car part 1 too, from her striking him, but you know. And then, so at sentencing, he'll have Black Hollywood on his side. Thank you, Megan Good. Ugh, I mean, I wish all that reporting of what AAFCA, I don't want to say AAFCA, that kind of sounds weird. Sounds like I'm saying something wrong. But all that reporting around that, it bothers me so much that this is an award ceremony for multiple people to get their accolades. And the stories that the news media that loves to talk about Hollywood and red carpet stuff, they decide to frame that event as some like, look at this bad person on the red carpet. It bothered me so much to see the coverage of that whole like nice event. And thank God, like people like I think Pam, I think Dramac, I think maybe Chillmonger too. Thank God, like creators were giving a positive light to that whole event and what it's actually about. And then Ghost says, I feel like she just didn't have a life other than using his money. She wasn't working. She just ran around getting drunk and telling her friends that Jonathan Majors is her boyfriend. No way. Yeah, and yet, so that's another thing we keep seeing throughout this theme. Kelli gets to say, you've seen everything that supports us, but you didn't see anything that supports what the defense is saying. Well, you have to be careful with your words because you can't say it doesn't exist. You have to just say that the jury didn't see it because that's factually true. They weren't able to see it. So, and then sitting on the couch, the defendant stood over her, towering, screaming at her. Sounds familiar. Yeah, so that sounds like what we heard. Oh my God, what are their names? Not Maura, the other one. Emma Cooper. Emma Duncan. Emma Cooper? Emma Duncan. Emma. Sorry for the wrong Emma name that I'm just blurting out there. But that sounds a lot like what Emma said. And then Barbara, so Kat also got the transcripts for jury instructions. We're currently halfway through. Yeah, and actually I should figure out a time that I'll do the jury instructions. Thank God that one's much shorter, and it's only one. So maybe like an impromptu stream like Sunday or something. But yeah, jury instructions will be very interesting to read now that we see this last line that I still have up over here. Verdict, guilty of all counts. intentional and reckless. So the prosecutors are saying, we want it all, even though that's not compatible. Like, that's problematic. Again, guys, prosecution, that's the government. They should never be out for a win. They should be out for justice, not a win. And they're literally asking, give us all four, even though it doesn't make sense to convict someone of intentional and reckless for the same exact thing. Give us all four anyway. That's insane. And then, yeah, okay, so this is great. So we're talking about Officer Lucero's body cam again. Oh, please. We saw that she did not have anything unloaded in that house because everything was still in suitcases and boxes. Yeah, she was living out of her suitcases. And then Wonder Woman, that's okay. Being late is fine. Oh, don't put the sad faces. Wait, what was the Eminem quote? What was the Eminem quote? This shit is exhausting. So Daisy says this shit's exhausting. I pray for Jonathan Majors because as you're reading this, cat, I'm just imagining him in that courtroom going through it. I got mad reading this. I mean, I don't feel like I don't need to hold it back. Like, you guys know my position and where I stand, and that's fine. But sometimes I was like, I'm pausing and I'm going off on a tangent, and I'm like, I should just read this through. But I couldn't help it because I was just getting mad reading it, and it doesn't. When I say it doesn't personally affect me, like, just take that in the right way, guys. I mean, like, I'm not directly dealing with the repercussions of what he has to go through from this. But I still, like, I feel like I feel it, if that makes sense. And then Barbara and all her trivia knowledge. And then let's see. Rosemary Carter said something that B is responding to. So Rosemary says, am I wrong if I hope that Grace Jabari's next relationship is exactly like the one she's trying to portray right now because I need her to understand how serious what she's pointing him to be really is. Well, and that's what's interesting about the fact that Priya Chaudhry brought up, you had an ex that unalived himself. And you still don't have the empathy for what that means. Your problem, according to the Bellevue evaluation, your problem is self-humiliation. People pointing out that you drink a lot. Things that could make you think you're losing someone. Loss of a relationship. Your triggers are you. Things that you don't want to happen. They're ego-centered. And then, yeah, B's saying, Rosemary Carter, it would be poetic justice. And then Big Bruce. So, move, man, silly girl. What's more likely? You got drunk and got cuts and bruises you don't even know, or Jonathan Majors actually hit you after you were running after him. Sickening lie. So, hey, Big Bruce. So, nice to see you in here. And then B says, the truth doesn't matter, just alternative facts. In other words, bold-faced lies. The pretty lies, the big lies, the white lies. And then, so Sheed with the play. The play was brought up at trial. And Grace Jabari was like, no, I don't remember what it was about at all. I don't remember what it was even called. I don't know anything about it. Shield me from acknowledging that it was about everything I'm about to project on Jonathan Majors in the next few lines of my testimony. So, yeah, it was asked about. But all she remembers was we had some drinks at it. Daisy's the Hermione of the chat. That's so good. Can I tell you guys know how I'm so bad at like butchering names, right? With Harry Potter, reading that growing up, in my head, before I saw the movies where you can actually hear it pronounced out loud, I pronounce her name like Hermione in my head. That's how my brain read it on paper. So I've always been bad at pronouncing names. And then Eliza says, madness, the sky is a marshmallow. Look at this comic book I made. Hey, Pam. Hey, Andre. I'm seeing some people like way late. This is like an hour ago, so I don't know if you guys are still in here, but hello. And then, yeah, so Pam is saying, make sure you watch the timeline video with Danny, Kat, and Pam. Grace was not about to get married and have children with Jonathan Majors. He was trying so hard to get rid of her. Yeah, she basically was like, I need $20K for my tax bill. Let me come lay it down real quick and earn my money. So that's in the playlist too. Like, I think the playlist is linked in the description and you'll see a playlist. It's called something about adding breaking down the timeline. But you'll see all of our thumbnails, but that's the video. It's like 4 hours long, worth every second. And then Daisy, it's about what happened in the car according to Kelli Galaway, but saying everything but what happened in the damn car. Yeah, let's go into a whole spiel about victims as an entirety. And then, let's see. You guys are so chatty. I love you guys. I'm sorry I can't, like, if I tried to read these in real time while we were going through it, we'd be here long enough to go home and call someone 32 times, open a bottle, light a candle, get real comfy, take our pants off, and start texting our friend in England. And yeah, so I would love to be able to read all your comments while they're happening so I can actually know the context of it. But I'm so glad you guys can chat in the chat amongst yourselves and be friends and know each other. Let's see what we've got left. We'll close it up. Again, I don't know a time where we can read the jury instructions, but those are shorter, so it won't be such an intensive 3-hour stream. And then Juanita says, I'm scared for whoever that woman gets with next. They better have an adamantium Psychian wallet. He was intentionally reckless with her number. He should have never called. Dated or in any way, shape, or form of interaction outside of work. It'd be like that. You know, it's kind of a good idea to stay away from people that you work with too, I think that kind of always leads to trouble. Let's see. The DA didn't win as much as the loose definition of the charge, plus the muted evidence won. If anything, the ADA lost because, yeah, I think they lost because they tried to charge like 8 or 9 different counts initially. And then the best we get is a violation and an unintentional assault where they muddied what that assault could apply to. So none of us who aren't English have issues with those books. Yeah, that's a great point, right? Like, the Fani case wouldn't be there. Just don't date people that you're, like, working with, because it always ends up being a problem. Guys, as usual, I am hungry, so my stomach is rumbling. I'm gonna go have some dinner finally, and I hope you guys are enjoying your Friday night. I'm sure it's, like, Saturday morning for a few of you that are tuned in. Eliza, if you're still in here, it's probably Saturday for you. I want to thank you guys so much, not just for joining me to do this transcript reading and pointing out what you guys notice, but also being here to support, like, kind of this whole coverage this whole way. And I'm glad we're still doing it. I've seen a lot of you guys drop a lot of positive comments about, you know, just that appearance. I think it was a pretty big appearance. It looks like a great award show. But, you know, the idea that he's out on the red carpet and you guys are showing him love, I love to see it every time it comes up on my feed. So thanks as always for being here. Stay tuned for an update on the next live. I don't know when I'm going to schedule it, but it will be soon. And we'll get together then and have a good time. Take care.